Chapter 75. John Lasseter explained. Mr. Williams, the girl's movements are indeed a little stiff. Before the production, I already reminded Mr. Hansen of this problem. It was Mr. Hansen who insisted that we do it to see the effect. Eric looked at Jeffrey, and Jeffrey nodded. Can't you make it smoother? Mr. Lasseter, money is not a problem. This opening logo may be used for many years, so of course, we have to make it better. John Lasseter shook his head and said, Mr. Williams, I guarantee that this is the highest level of 3D animation. Pixar only started experimenting with human motion modeling last year. Compared to the baby in the last short film, Tin Soldier, the movements of the little girl in red in the opening are much smoother. Other studios can't even do this. When Eric heard the name Tin Soldier, a thought flashed through his mind, but he didn't catch it. His main attention was still on the opening of the Firefly. Since there was no way to improve it, Eric and Jeffrey discussed it in a low voice. In the 30-second opening, except for the scene where the girl opened the bottle cap to release the Firefly, everything else was perfect. Moreover, after editing, the opening logo was usually around 15 seconds. For shorter ones, such as the trailer that was to be played at the Super Bowl, they might only be able to insert the words Firefly Film for a short 5 seconds. Therefore, the 30-second material was enough to create a perfect logo. Since that was the case, Eric didn't ask Pixar to redo it. The next step was much simpler. He signed the document and paid the balance to John Lasseter. After that, John Lasseter rejected Eric's dinner invitation. Just as he was about to leave, Eric suddenly stopped him again. Mr. Lasseter, I remember you mentioned Tin Soldier just now? John Lasseter nodded and said, Yes, Mr. Williams. We started making this short film last February. It's around 5 minutes, and we've already applied for this year's Oscar for Best Short Film. Hearing him mention the Oscars, Eric was completely certain. John, you don't mind me calling you that, right? You can call me Eric. If you don't have anything urgent, can you stay and chat for a while? I'm very interested in 3D animation. John Lasseter carefully observed Eric's expression. He suddenly remembered that Eric was about to become the youngest billionaire in Hollywood with the box office of Home Alone. Pixar, on the other hand, was at the end of its rope and could collapse at any moment. Perhaps this young man could save Pixar. Thinking of this, John Lasseter's heart became fervent. Of course, Eric. In Firefly's conference room, John Lasseter explained, The idea for Tin Soldier came from my little nephew. Last Christmas, I saw him crawling around in a pile of toys, making a mess of the toys that had been arranged properly. Eric, if you are interested, I can call my assistant and send the videotape over. Eric also noticed the fervent look in John Lasseter's eyes. At the same time, he confirmed that this was the best opportunity to acquire Pixar. If he remembered correctly, the reason why Pixar was able to attract the attention of the animation giant, Disney, and eventually signed a contract with Disney to produce 3 3D animated films was because Tin Soldiers won the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film. Originally, Eric thought that he had 5 to 6 years to acquire Pixar. Now that he thought about it, if Pixar signed a contract with Disney again like in his previous life, it would be very difficult for him to acquire Pixar. In order to let John Lasseter know that he was really interested in 3D animation, Eric agreed to John's suggestion. If it's convenient, then I'll have to trouble your assistant to make a trip. John Lasseter made a call. Half an hour later, Eric and the others returned to the screening room. The new toy soldier curiously sized up everything in the room, and a silly-looking baby crawled in. The toy soldier was full of expectations for its new owner. However, the baby was rude to the toy soldier, and it had no choice but to escape from the baby's claws. However, the musical instrument on the toy soldier attracted the baby's attention. Thus, a chase began. John Lasseter sat on the right side of Eric. As the animation played, John used simple sentences to explain the technical difficulties of the seemingly simple animation to Eric. Eric listened carefully and nodded from time to show that he understood. The animation quickly finished. Although he wanted to complain about the baby's appearance, Eric still praised the animation on the surface. It couldn't be helped. Whether it was animation or games, when Westerners made them, they strived for realism. To Eric, who was an Asian, There was only one word to describe it: ugly. In comparison, the animations in games made by Asians, regardless of the quality, the characters were all quite beautiful. This was even more prominent in 3D games. As long as the characters were beautiful, one could determine the approximate production of a game. After the animation played, Eric and the others didn't leave the screening room again. Instead, they continued to talk about 3D animation. Compared to John Lasseter, who didn't have much confidence in 3D technology, Eric knew the development prospects of 3D animation like the back of his hand. In the end, Eric couldn't help but reveal a little bit of his idea for Toy Story. Eric, you must have come up with this idea after watching Tin Soldiers, right? I actually had the idea of making a 3D animated feature film, but you know, with Pixar's current situation, it's completely impossible to realize this plan. Finally, they got to the point. Eric put on a more serious expression and whispered, "John, is Jobs almost unable to hold on?" This was not a secret in the industry. As long as one was interested, they could find out. John Lasseter didn't hide it. Jobs just sold Pixar's hardware department, and now only the software animation department is left. If there isn't a miracle, John paused and looked at Eric expectantly, Pixar Studio will either be dissolved or sold. However, there aren't many people willing to take over. Why isn't anyone willing to take over? Pixar's technology should be the most advanced in the industry, right? John Lasseter hesitated for a moment. He looked at Eric, the potential investor, for a few seconds. But at the end of the day, he was just a fanatical technician, not a businessman who was used to cheating. In the end, he decided to tell the truth. Because 3D animation technology is too expensive, and there's not much output. Unless the animation studio can complement the other departments, like a giant like Microsoft or a movie special effects company, no one will take over a studio that only costs money. Eric was very satisfied with John Lasseter's honesty. He pretended to think for a minute to whet John Lasseter's appetite before saying, "John, I'm very interested in 3D animation. It just so happens that after Home Alone, I have a lot of money to invest. So, if possible, I'm willing to buy Pixar and invest in 3D animation." The toy idea we were talking about is good. John Lasseter thought that Eric would lose interest after hearing his explanation. He didn't expect to hear this. He didn't know what to say for a while. The two of them had a good chat, and John Lasseter had a good impression of this young man. Therefore, John Lasseter didn't want Eric to be like Steve Jobs and fall into the quagmire of Pixar again. The reason why Steve Jobs, a billionaire, was at the end of his rope was because Pixar kept taking money from him without creating the corresponding economic benefits. But on the other hand, he really loved 3D animation technology. Otherwise, he wouldn't have repeatedly rejected Disney's offer and stayed at Pixar, a studio that no one was optimistic about. After thinking about it, John Lasseter proposed a compromise. "Eric, I think you don't need to buy Pixar at all. If you're interested in 3D animation, you can invest in a 3D animation with Pixar. This way, it won't cost too much, and if it fails, you can easily leave." Eric was a little surprised that John could actually make such a pertinent suggestion from his position, instead of trying to trick him into entering the trap. But if he followed John's advice, he would be playing lay phone doing the work for Jobs. In his previous life, after the success of Toy Story, Pixar's stock price skyrocketed, and Steve Jobs went straight from the edge of bankruptcy to the ranks of billionaires. Eric put on the tone of a rich and willful young man. "No, John, help me pass a message to Steve Jobs. I'm willing to buy Pixar for $20 million. If the deal goes through, I'll invest $30 million to make an animated movie." "Eric, I don't think Steve Jobs will agree to $20 million. He has invested no less than $20 million in Pixar over the years." Eric said, "John, there are profits and losses in business. If you have to get back more of what you invest, then it's not business. Just pass my message to Steve Jobs. $20 million, not a cent more. I'm very busy and don't have time to argue about the price. If Steve Jobs isn't happy with the price, then don't contact me. I believe he'll make a wise choice." "In that case, okay, I'll pass your message to Steve Jobs." After John Lasseter left, Eric said to Jeffrey, who had been holding back for a long time, Jeffrey, how come you didn't persuade me this time? Jeffrey spread his hands. I know it's useless, so why say so much? But since you asked, I have to say that buying Pixar is definitely not a wise choice. Eric laughed and joked. I wanted to make a bet with you, but you don't have anything I'm interested in, so forget it. Chapter 76. After entrusting John Lasseter to deliver a message to Jobs, Eric put the matter of Pixar aside. Given Jobs' current situation, Eric believed that the chances of Jobs agreeing to his offer were more than 90%. Even if Jobs refused to let go of Pixar, would there be a shortage of 3D animation technicians in Silicon Valley? On January 21st, Pretty Woman officially wrapped up. The originally planned 3-week shooting time was actually completed in just over 2 weeks. Eric's reputation as a fast shooter in the minds of the crew was even more deeply ingrained. Moreover, Eric also stayed up late to edit the 59-second Super Bowl trailer. On the morning of the movie's completion, Jeffrey went to New York again with the trailer. Even with the energetic young body, Eric still felt deeply exhausted after more than 2 weeks of high-intensity work. There was no wrap party or touching farewell scene. Everyone lived in Los Angeles. After finishing their work, they packed up their things and went their separate ways. It just so happened that tomorrow was the annual Super Bowl Sunday. Even Eric, who had no feelings for the Super Bowl, could feel the fanatical anticipation of most of the crew for this day. Regardless of the exhaustion from so many days, the cameraman Nick Frank and several other members went straight to the airport and flew to Miami after Eric shouted that they were done. If you were not an American, it was difficult to understand the American fanaticism for the Super Bowl. No one knew when or where, but the founder of the National Football League, Lamar Hunt, saw his daughter playing the Super Bowl. Coincidentally, he wanted to come up with a name for the finals of the 2 National Football League championships, so he had the inspiration to name it the Super Bowl. In fact, the Super Bowl and Super Bowl had the same pronunciation in English. Someone was slacking off. After decades of development, the Super Bowl became a big carnival for all Americans. The live broadcast of the Super Bowl also became the highest-rated program. This was also the reason why Eric insisted on showing the trailer of Pretty Woman at the Super Bowl. He didn't know how long he slept, but when he woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. Eric stretched his body and felt the bones in his body crackling. He then put on his clothes and washed up, and walked downstairs in high spirits. A petite figure was busy in the living room. The coffee table in front of the sofa was filled with food, and the television had been replaced with a new one. Seeing Eric appear, the girl picked up the t-shirt and ran towards Eric. Hey, what are you doing in broad daylight? Eric laughed as he dodged Drew's attack. Your head is full of filth, stinky man. Drew pursed her lips and continued to take off Eric's t-shirt. She put a bright red jersey on Eric's body. What's the meaning of this? Eric tugged at his uncomfortable t-shirt. On the night of the Super Bowl, I announced that you are now a fan of the San Francisco 49ers. Eric asked weakly. Can I say no? You can't. After saying that, the girl ignored Eric and turned around to continue her work. Eric shrugged indifferently and picked up a bucket of fried chicken wings and a few bottles of juice. He turned and went upstairs to the study, leaving the girl to do whatever she wanted in the living room. It wasn't until the game started a few hours later that Eric was once again pulled back to the living room by Drew. This season's finals was between the Cincinnati Bengals and the San Francisco 49ers. If Eric was 20 years younger, he might be interested in this kind of fierce game. Unfortunately, his body contained the soul of an uncle, and he was an Asian. He had not been exposed to the North American football culture since he was young, so he really couldn't arouse much interest. The reason why he had been sitting patiently in the living room was to wait for the trailer to play. Finally, the second quarter of the game ended. After the Chevrolet commercial, the picture flashed and the carefully edited 5-second Firefly logo appeared on the television screen. At this time, more than 100 million viewers in North America were waiting in front of the TV. When they saw the words Firefly film, most people's first reaction was that the picture was beautiful. At the same time, they also had a question. Firefly film, what kind of advertisement was this? Before the Super Bowl live broadcast, There had never been a movie trailer, so 99% of the audience did not think in this direction. The 5-second opening flashed by. In the close-up, the beautiful blonde opened her red lips and said, "Are you ready?" No one answered. In the roar of the engine that was deliberately amplified several times, the hard lines of the silver Lamborghini Ghost left the bow. Cool. In front of the TV, many people's hearts seemed to have a brief resonance at the moment when the engine sounded. At the same time, people thought they understood that this was a sports car advertisement. However, they soon found that they were very wrong. The reason why Eric edited this shot was to use the sound of the Lamborghini's engine to attract the audience's attention to the TV screen. Next, the singing of Pretty Woman sounded and the scene of Pretty Woman began to be edited. Although it was only a short 50 seconds, Eric had put in a lot of effort in editing this trailer. The scene was also about 10 seconds long. It was divided into 4 parts. Edward and Vivian getting to know each other, getting along, getting to know each other, and leaving each other. The meeting on the Walk of Fame, the getting along in the hotel, the getting to know each other over time, and the separation of status. Although there were only shots and no lines in the middle of more than 40 seconds, most of the audience in front of the TV understood that this was a love story. Moreover, it was a love story between a prince and Cinderella. Of course, Eric was not stupid enough to say everything clearly. Many of the shots gave people a sense of ambiguity, as if to say, if you want to know, go to the cinema. The 59-second advertisement finally came to an end. The song fell and the last scene appeared. Julia's tone was firm and expectant. "I want a fairy tale." The scene ended and the screen turned black. Julia's last sentence also left the audience with a huge suspense. Would she get a fairy tale? Finally, a line of words appeared on the TV. Pretty Woman, the director of Home Alone, Eric Williams's new film, Pretty Woman, will be released in North America on February 10th. Please look forward to it. In front of thousands of televisions, people temporarily lost interest in the following advertisement and competition and started to discuss it. The guy who thought of a movie trailer during the Super Bowl is a genius. Aren't Super Bowl advertisements very expensive? It must be very expensive. This advertisement is almost a minute long. It would cost at least $1 million US. It's too extravagant. It's enough to make a new movie. But I think the trailer is very interesting. Maybe I can go and watch it after it's released. The female lead is so beautiful. I like Al Pacino more. I heard that he's making a comeback. So it's this movie. I've watched The Godfather series 5 or 6 times. Eric Williams has a new film again. Yeah, that's too fast. I wonder who this boy wonder is going to harm this time. A couple? Mom, I recognize those words. Home Alone. Let's go and watch Kevin again tomorrow, okay? No, baby. You must be mistaken. Mom, you're lying. You taught me those words. I've heard this song before. It's Oh Beautiful Woman by Roy Orbison. It's from a long time ago. Really? Do you still have this record? I don't think I can find it. Your grandfather bought the record. Who knows where it went? That's a pity. But after the movie is released, there will definitely be a soundtrack. We can just buy a box. Cole, let's go watch this movie on Valentine's Day. Margaret, didn't we say we're going to watch Tom Hanks' Hell's Neighborhood? But I think this movie is more interesting. Okay, I'll listen to you. Hey, that girl said she wants a fairy tale. Do you think she'll succeed? Honey, it's a movie released on Valentine's Day. The ending will definitely be perfect. But I think many scenes imply that the male and female leads will be separated. Many directors like to use sad endings to make the audience cry. Okay, don't think too much. Let's go watch it together. Chapter 77. After the night of the Super Bowl, the most talked about was not the San Francisco 49ers who won the Super Bowl, but the trailer of Wind and Moon that appeared for the first time in the Super Bowl live broadcast. The number of viewers for this Super Bowl reached 150 million, accounting for 50% of the total population of North America. Coupled with the effect of word of mouth, in just one day, all Americans knew about the news of Eric Williams, director of Home Alone. The major movie giants also keenly felt the amazing influence of the Super Bowl trailer. They mobilized a lot of resources and carried out a detailed investigation and analysis of the series of data after the trailer of Wind and Moon was broadcasted. As for the results, they would probably have to wait until next year's Super Bowl advertising bid to see it. In his previous life, the first Super Bowl trailer was 1990's Day of Independence. Fox took a risk and bid a huge amount of money to broadcast the trailer for the Super Bowl. In the end, the disaster sci-fi film took a huge box office of $300 million in North America. Since then, it started the situation of the Super Bowl trailer heroes competing for hegemony. Eric believed that the effect achieved by the trailer of Wind and Moon would not be much lower than the trailer of Day of Independence. If he wanted to easily win advertising spots next year, it would not only be a matter of money, but also a good relationship with the media that broadcast the Super Bowl that year. Although the Super Bowl had a total of more than 60 advertisements, in order to achieve a good advertising effect, the number of advertisements for each type was strictly limited. It was impossible to use all the advertisements to broadcast the trailer. It was also because of this that the Super Bowl advertisements in the future were almost monopolized by a few movie giants. Compared to the increasingly high production costs of movies, the price of a Super Bowl advertisement in the millions was something that many movie companies could afford. However, for a movie company that was not strong enough, even if you wanted to spend money, they would not necessarily want it. In the next few days, the sharp-nosed media also began to report and analyze this matter. The New York Times even wrote that the trailer of Wind and Moon was the biggest winner of this Super Bowl. The most direct result of this incident was that the box office of The Kid, which was also directed by Eric, bounced back again. It happened in the 9th week of The Kid's release. Originally, the statistics agency estimated that The Kid's box office would be around $12 million in the new week, but in fact after a week, The Kid's box office had reached $198 million. Even if it was calculated according to Eric's current percentage, the extra $6 million box office was equivalent to earning back the $1.5 million advertising fee invested in the Super Bowl trailer. Thank goodness, thank goodness. In Firefly's office, Eric breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the box office report for Home Alone this week. Jeffrey, who was sitting opposite him, smiled and said, "Yeah, luckily it's $198 million. If it broke $200 million this week, it would be a waste of such a good topic." The reason why the two of them said this was because the week after the Super Bowl trailer, the attention of Wind and Moon had reached its peak. If The Kid's box office broke $200 million, the topic would only play the role of icing on the cake. If it was delayed to the next week, the popularity of the Super Bowl trailer would weaken slightly. If The Kid's box office broke $200 million at that time, it would become the first movie to break $200 million again in 3 years, which would be a new hype topic. Then, with the addition of normal publicity, it was almost obvious that Wind and Moon would get good results after the release. Eric, are you really not going to participate in the publicity of Wind and Moon? Eric shook his head and said, "It's enough for Al and Julia to cooperate with Fox to promote the film. I may have another thing to do. Of course, I will still participate in the premiere." The other thing Eric said was related to Pixar. The day after the Super Bowl, Eric received a call from Jobs. After introducing each other, Jobs enthusiastically asked to talk to Eric. Eric asked if it was about the price of Pixar. After receiving an affirmative answer, Eric directly hung up the phone. After confirming Jobs' intentions, Eric did not hesitate too much. He used the contract for the kid's home as collateral and applied for a $50 million loan from the bank. Although deep down, Eric was very resistant to the loan, he had to do it now. Even without the Pixar matter, Eric had to apply for a loan because he did not have enough money left to pay taxes. It was not that Eric had not thought of borrowing money from others, but according to the memories left in his mind and what he had seen in the past 6 months, Eric knew that in the United States, even between friends and relatives, the topic of borrowing money was rarely discussed. It was a very awkward thing. Compared with the Orientals who were used to helping their relatives and friends, Americans were more used to borrowing money from the bank. After thinking about it, Eric had to, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Since he had asked for a loan, he directly applied for a huge $50 million loan. He even had the investment for his next movie. $50 million was indeed a huge amount of money in this era. If Jobs asked now, the bank would probably just tell him to get out. For Eric, when he asked for $50 million, the bank even tried to sound him out if he wanted to borrow more. Now that a week had passed, Jobs was expected to call again. Although Jobs had a rather irritable and conceited personality, he was also a flexible person. Moreover, based on the information Eric collected over the past few days, Jobs' next computer and Pixar studios were on the verge of collapse. Eric's $20 million price was a lot less than what Jobs had invested in Pixar, but it would solve the crisis at Next Computer. Jobs' ambitions, on the other hand, were mainly focused on personal computers. Eric was not worried that Jobs would pass up the opportunity to get rid of Pixar. Of course, Jobs might also sound out whether Microsoft was interested in taking over Pixar, as he had done in his previous life. But Eric was sure that Microsoft would offer a lower price in that case. After more than a week of intense post-production, Pretty Woman was officially completed. By February, the loan had been credited to Eric's account, and Eric had not received any more calls from Jobs. He had begun to admire Jobs' patience, but Eric remained nonchalant about it. When dealing with a highly intelligent genius like Jobs, it was easy for the other side to seize on and exploit a flaw. A week before the release of Pretty Woman, Fox held a screening of Pretty Woman in Los Angeles. After that, the long-awaited reviews of Pretty Woman began to appear in the newspapers. Whether it was because Eric felt guilty about paying for the Super Bowl trailer out of his own pocket, or Fox itself had greater confidence in Pretty Woman, Eric felt that Fox's advertising had reached the level of a major production. Correspondingly, the public relations for the film critics were also in place. The reviews that appeared in the newspapers were almost one-sided praise. Of course, this also had to do with the quality of Pretty Woman. If Pretty Woman was a flop, no matter how generous the red packets were, the film critics who relied on their reputation to make a living would not be able to lie and praise a flop. On February 9th, Pretty Woman officially held its premiere at the Chinese Theater in Los Angeles. Under Fox's operation, in addition to the Pretty Woman crew members, more than a dozen stars came to support the movie. The short red carpet was dazzling. After a simple speech, the movie quickly came to the screening stage. Eric returned to his seat and quietly enjoyed Pretty Woman. Originally sitting on Eric's left was Fox executive Calta Hunter, but at some point, it was replaced by another man in his 30s. Because the lights were dim, Eric didn't care. But after a while, the other person took the initiative to talk to him. "Hello, Mr. Williams, I'm Steve Jobs." Eric turned his head in surprise. At this time, Jobs was only 33 years old. He was in the prime of his life, had not yet gone bald, and looked a little handsome. But Eric knew that under this handsome appearance, there was indeed arrogance and irritation. Since the other party had come to the door, Eric had to smile and extend his hand. "Hello, Mr. Jobs." After greeting each other, the two men turned their attention back to the movie. No one took the initiative to talk. It wasn't until more than an hour later when the movie ended that Jobs spoke again. "Mr. Williams, can we talk?" Chapter 78. Eric nodded, said goodbye to Jeffrey and the others, and walked with Jobs to a nearby coffee shop. It was a country full of piety. I saw millions of pilgrims, so much so that when I was shaved bald, I didn't show any displeasure or resistance. Instead, I followed the flow of people and walked all the way to the banks of the Ganges. But at the same time, I saw the backwardness and ignorance of that country. Later, I felt that perhaps Thomas Edison had contributed far more to mankind than those philosophers or artists. After returning to California, I no longer pursued an illusory philosophy of life. Instead, I chose the electronics industry as my lifelong goal. A year later, in an abandoned garage, I set up Apple with a few friends. In the coffee shop, Eric gently stirred his coffee and patiently listened to Jobs speak. This was a rare opportunity. Although Eric didn't like Jobs' character, he admired his talent. After more than 10 minutes, Eric finally couldn't help but interrupt. "Steve, Have you reflected on yourself? The sudden interruption flashed a look of displeasure on Jobs's face, and he asked, reflect? Why should I reflect? For example, why were you kicked out of Apple? Jobs corrected him seriously. No, Eric, I wasn't kicked out of Apple. I gave up on Apple. Eric shrugged and said, see, this is the flaw in your character. You are unwilling to compromise, which has led to a bottleneck in the development of both you and Apple. If you had made an appropriate compromise with the Apple board a few years ago, maybe you could have stayed at Apple. With your strength, it would have been easy to take back the leadership of Apple again. Jobs retorted, I made the first compromise, and those people would force me to make the second, third, and even more compromises. Eric chuckled and shook his head. He knew that it was impossible to convince a young man who was obsessed with success. Now that he had taken Pixar, he didn't know if Jobs would have a chance to return to Apple in the future. In addition to his talent and perseverance, luck played a large part in Jobs's dazzling achievements in his previous life. If he had successfully sold Pixar, there wouldn't have been Pixar's glory after the release of Toy Story. And he himself was more likely to become the target of ridicule. In that case, perhaps the desperate Apple would rather file for bankruptcy than risk everything and bring Jobs back. Eric had no intention of persuading Jobs, so he changed the subject to the meeting. Let's talk about Pixar, Steve. Since you found me, it means you accepted my offer, right? Jobs hesitated. He had arranged the meeting to see if he could persuade Eric to raise the price in a face-to-face situation. He was quite confident in his eloquence. Unfortunately, after saying so much, the young man in front of him either interrupted him or acted as if he was not moved at all. In the end, he also understood that if he said that he wanted to increase the price, the other party would leave immediately, just like in the previous phone call. Eric, I agree to the offer of $20 million, but all the money must be paid in one lump sum. No problem at all. Eric put down his coffee cup and snapped his fingers happily. Jobs looked suspiciously at Eric, who had been calm before, suddenly showing an excited expression. For a moment, he even felt that he might have made a mistake without realizing it. But now that he had made the decision, Jobs would not go back on it. He was a man who rarely regretted things. So Jobs immediately asked, Eric, are you interested in personal computers? Eric raised his eyebrows and quickly understood what Jobs meant. You want me to invest in your next computer company? Yes, the personal computer is an electronic product with a lot of potential. Just look at the development data of IBM's personal computer business in the past few years. Just last year. Stop, Stephen. I'm not interested in those professional data. I just want to ask, if I invest in Next, will you accept my suggestions on the company's operations? Well, Eric, you only need to invest $30 million plus the $20 million from Pixar. And I have enough money to implement a good idea I had before. I'm sure that will bring you enough profit. In other words, I'm only responsible for the investment and dividends, and I don't have the authority to intervene in the management of the computer company. Jobs nodded. After the Apple incident, he would not give up the absolute leadership of his company again. Eric, you're a good director, but I think I definitely know a lot more about electronics than you do. Eric was a little tempted, but after Jobs made it clear, Eric could only shake his head and say, then I refuse. Well, Eric, I have a project proposal here. Maybe you can take a look first. Actually, no, Eric interrupted Jobs. Steve, I know you're a very thoughtful person, and I believe in your talent. But I won't put my money into a project that I have no control over. Just as you stubbornly believe in your own ideas, I'm a stubborn person. When we disagree, conflicts like Apple's a few years ago will erupt again. Jobs stopped taking the document out of his briefcase. He originally thought that with his eloquence, it would be easy to convince an 18-year-old young man. Unfortunately, Eric did not listen to him at all, which made the proud Jobs feel a little angry. Well, that's a shame, Jobs said calmly, trying to suppress his anger. Eric, do you need to go to Pixar first? I hope we can close the deal as soon as possible. Eric thought about it and said, I'm not free tomorrow. Pretty Woman premieres tomorrow, and I have to fly to New York the day after tomorrow. It's my girlfriend's birthday. In Jobs' mind, the premiere of the movie was a big deal. How could something like his girlfriend's birthday delay the deal with Pixar? Eric, maybe you can just get someone to send a gift to your girlfriend. You seem to have more than one girlfriend anyway. Eric looked at Jobs speechlessly. Maybe the day after tomorrow. Jobs immediately slammed the table and interrupted Eric. Well, the day after tomorrow. My girlfriend's birthday is still very important. Even though he said he was not free the next day, Eric did not have anything to do personally. It was just that every director had the anxiety of a movie's premiere, and Eric was not in the mood to turn his attention to Pixar for the time being. Fox had already arranged everything. Because the scale of the premiere was much larger than the critics' test screening, the reviews of Pretty Woman that appeared in the newspapers the next day also began to develop towards multipolarity. In addition to the newspapers he subscribed to, Eric bought more than a dozen newspapers early in the morning and read all the reviews of Pretty Woman. Out of the 17 newspapers, 9 were praiseworthy, 5 were both praiseworthy and critical, and the remaining 3 were unceremoniously critical. Eric calculated according to the formula in his mind and found that the rating should be 7.5. Among the movie review websites in his previous life, this score should be considered relatively high. Since the reputation was good, Eric was relieved. After breakfast, Eric drove to Fox's headquarters in Century City. Because it wasn't the prime time of the movie, Fox easily raised 1,900 screens for Charming Woman. This screen count had reached the level of blockbusters in this era. For the previous 2 movies, Eric only received the box office data a week later. Now he had reached the level where he could get the daily box office data from Fox. In the early hours of the morning, Eric, Jeffrey, and several Fox executives waited nervously in the conference room together. Even Fox's president, Barry Diller, made an exception and stayed. Even though the conference room was large and the windows were open, thick cigar smoke drifted in the room. At the same time, 7 or 8 staff members were quickly taking calls and recording the box office data outside. An hour later, the box office for the day was finally tabulated. The statistician handed the data to several executives, and everyone gathered around. Sitting at the outermost edge, Calta Hunter was the first to see the data. Wow, for dollars. $36 million. It's another Home Alone. After Eric saw the figure of $4.36 million on the report, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Cheers rang out in the conference room, and everyone's sleepiness was swept away. Jeffrey said, "In this way, tomorrow's box office will be a little higher. It may reach $5 million. It can collect $15 million in the 3 days of the weekend. Next Tuesday is Valentine's Day, and the box office will explode. It's very likely to get $10 million on the weekday." Calta retorted with a smile. "Jeffrey, your calculation is a little conservative. The box office on Valentine's Day will definitely exceed the weekend. I think it's not a problem for the box office to surpass Pretty Woman's in the first week." Eric saw that these overly excited people had set their sights on Pretty Woman, but he knew that it was obviously impossible. Perhaps because of the previous promotion, the box office would be very high in the first week, but it would not be able to continue the next week. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but say, "The key is that the box office next week will definitely drop more. After all, it's not a holiday now. So, it's better not to compare with Pretty Woman." Pretty Woman's box office exceeded $20 million for 6 consecutive weeks. Everyone present was a professional. Of course, they knew that Eric was telling the truth. Barry Diller said, "Eric, focus on preparing for your next movie. If you need any help, Fox will fully support you." Eric pretended that he did not understand Fox's intention to interfere with his next movie. He smiled and said, "If it's possible, let's leave the celebration party to Fox." Barry Diller did not mind Eric's pretense. He laughed and said, "Haha, Fox is very willing to fork out this money. It's next week at the Beverly Hilton." Chapter 79. Today was her birthday, 20 years old. After today, her teenage years would be over. It happened to be the weekend. She wandered around the streets alone, feeling like a stray cat. She wandered around Broadway in the morning. When she passed by a small theater, she saw the advertisement at the door. It was a performance of La Traviata by students from a New York theater school. So she went in to watch the performance. The performance was pretty good. She secretly wiped a few tears. It was already noon when she came out. She bought a piece of chocolate cream cheese and sat alone on a bench in Central Park, eating it slowly. Ever since she successfully slimmed down, in order to maintain her figure, she basically avoided high-calorie food. But today was her birthday. She could indulge herself. She carefully finished her lunch and threw the box into the trash can. She carefully checked her precious windbreaker to make sure there was no food residue on it. Only then did she relax. She took out a tissue to wipe her hands, picked up her bag, and continued to wander. She passed by Hell's Kitchen and turned into the Flatiron area. She glanced at the Empire State Building from afar and began to turn back. Unknowingly, she walked onto Fifth Avenue. She walked through a few luxury stores with her chin up, picking and choosing. Although she didn't buy anything in the end, they noticed her Chanel trench coat. The shop assistants were still very warm to her and welcomed her to come back next time. No way. It's so expensive. The Chanel windbreaker was the one he gave her last time. It was white and had taken a beautiful street photo with it. She later found out how expensive this windbreaker was. It was worth several episodes of her salary. If she knew the price beforehand, she wouldn't have accepted it. After walking around, under the persuasion of a very eloquent shop assistant, she couldn't help but spend more than $2,000 to buy a bottle of Dior perfume. It seemed that he liked the smell. Sigh, in the end she couldn't help but think of that bastard. After all, it was her 20th birthday. Her parents and a few good friends had called and sent birthday gifts. Matthew Perry even gave her an expensive diamond bracelet and solemnly stated on the phone that he didn't have any improper thoughts about her. He just wanted to wish her a happy birthday and return her a favor. She decisively accepted the gift. This guy was so lucky. He was the only one who hadn't called for 4.5 days. In the past, on her birthdays, even if her parents weren't with her, she would call a few friends to have a meal or something and search for gifts in a lively manner. Unfortunately, she hadn't made any new friends on set. Marry in Action was a female workplace romantic comedy. There were a total of 4 female leads, and according to the number of scenes, she was the second female lead. When she first joined the cast, the other 3 female leads were very friendly to her. They went shopping, watched plays, and had a meal together. After spending a few days together, they began to casually ask if she could introduce her boyfriend to them. She finally understood the cause of the matter. She was an outsider. How could she be so popular from the start? At that time, she had already unilaterally broken up with Eric, and he didn't fly to New York to redeem himself. So she told him the truth, and that was it. The girls in the crew all wanted to become famous with this new drama series that NBC had high hopes for. They stole scenes, schemed against each other, bribed the screenwriter, and accompanied the producer. Anyway, she had heard of some filthy things happening in the crew. Among the girls, she was the prettiest, even surpassing the female lead. As a result, she was constantly harassed. A branch director even blatantly hinted that he could add some scenes for her as long as she accompanied him for dinner at night. She decisively refused. Until one day, the new handsome actor, Brad Pitt, was kicked out of the cast. In the industry, many things spread quickly. After that, no one dared to harass her. Even the producer of the drama was very polite to her and praised her for finding a good boyfriend. She was even more isolated in the crew. The other actresses secretly called her a scheming B*TCH and said something about breaking up. It turned out that they were deliberately hiding it. She was too lazy to explain. A bunch of little B*cheese. Jealous? Bite me. She didn't know if it was because she didn't find the right audience. Anyway, the high hopes for Marry in Action had very low ratings. The average number of viewers per episode was less than 6 million. After this season it would be axed. The fame she gained from it wasn't as great as being that guy's girlfriend. There would always be bits and pieces of news about her in the tabloids. They would always call her Eric Williams' current girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, rumored girlfriend, and so on. That group of people said that she would be dumped every 2 to 3 days. After that, she didn't dare to read the newspapers anymore. Anyway, they would never call her the female lead of Marry in Action. So sad, so hateful. Unknowingly, night fell. She still didn't want to go back. She was used to making breakfast alone, watching TV alone, washing clothes alone, lying alone, sleeping alone. Her 20th birthday was a special day. She suddenly realized that it was not lonely to be alone. Thinking about being alone was lonely. At the entrance of the cinema across the street, there was a long line. She curiously walked over. The poster of Pretty Woman was hung high at the entrance. The two lead actors were standing back to back with a smile. The tall girl looked really sexy. How hateful. Wasn't it because she accompanied that bastard for this opportunity? What was so great about it? Click, click. The familiar sound of a shutter sounded. She turned to look and saw a paparazzo turn around as if nothing had happened. Obviously, her pouting and frowning expression at the poster had been photographed. Should she leave immediately? Then what would the other party write? Ex-girlfriend scoffs at Williams's new work? How hateful. Unknowingly, she was still standing in the line to buy tickets. Just take it as a show to support you, bastard. See how much I miss you. A few minutes later, she walked into the theater with a movie ticket. For a full 2 hours, she couldn't help but put herself in the position of the female lead. She secretly wondered what the effect would be if she acted in the role. The plot continued. Oh, there was actually an exposed scene. If she acted in the role, with that guy's hateful personality, he would definitely delete this part. Well, it was fine. It seemed that he didn't particularly care about that woman named Julia Roberts. Thinking of this, she felt as if she had successfully stolen a scene, or won a game of chess, or won first place in a chicken wing eating competition when she was young. Anyway, that was the feeling. Then she saw the female lead get her own fairy tale. Where was her fairy tale? Her heart was empty. She walked out of the cinema dejectedly. It was past 9. She couldn't walk around anymore. He had reminded her more than once not to walk around alone at night. She had always been very obedient. After walking for a day, she didn't feel anything. After sitting in the cinema for 2 hours, her calves started to ache. She didn't want to move anymore, so she waved for a taxi. She climbed the stairs with difficulty and finally arrived in front of her apartment. The peephole lit up, and an inexplicable sense of anticipation welled up in her heart. Trembling, she took out the key to open the door, and finally saw the busy figure in the living room. All of her strength was instantly sucked out. Who said that women were born to walk around? It was nonsense. She was so tired. Leaning against the wall of the entrance, she stared at the figure in a daze. The busy man looked up and smiled when he saw her. Jenny, I'm so sorry. I only arrived in the afternoon. Last night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning to wait for the box office data. I couldn't buy a plane ticket, so I borrowed Mr. Diller's private jet. It was already 3 in the afternoon when I arrived. You weren't home, so I had to set it up myself. I'm not familiar with New York, and I almost got lost when I went shopping, so I might not have prepared well. Listening to his chatter, she felt warm in her heart. The man said to himself, lit a match, and lit the candles on the cake one by one before saying, "Happy birthday!" Throwing away her bag, she was still leaning against the wall. Without caring about her image, she raised her hands and made a gesture to ask for a hug. Her voice was aggrieved. Eric, my leg hurts. Chapter 80. The birthday dinner was eaten very slowly. Eric allowed Jennifer Aniston to lean on him lazily and whisper a few words from time to time. Their birthday song was not lively enough, but it was very heartwarming. After the song, they cut the cake and each of them only ate a piece. However, the bottle of red wine was consumed very quickly. Not eating anymore? Eric looked at the girl's blushing face and asked with concern. Yes. Jennifer Aniston nodded and hugged Eric. I'm so tired. Carry me to the shower. I don't want to move. No problem, my little princess. Eric smiled and got up to take out 2 beautifully wrapped gift boxes from his luggage. Here, a birthday gift and a Valentine's Day gift. Jennifer Aniston saw the 2 gift boxes and suddenly became unhappy. She took the gift boxes and placed them on the table. Then, she continued to snuggle into the man's arms. Don't you want to open them first? I'm not happy. I don't want to see them. Eric stroked the girl's blonde hair and said guiltily, "I'm sorry, Anne. I have an appointment with someone, so I have to leave early tomorrow morning." "Oh? And go back to Los Angeles. I also hope that you can be by my side. I'm tired. Shower." Okay. Eric picked the girl up and walked into the bathroom. With warm water, he gently unbuttoned Jennifer Aniston's clothes. The girl obediently raised her hand and let Eric do as he pleased. It had been a long time since they last met. Jennifer Aniston's expression became more shy. She lowered her eyes and her long eyelashes trembled. She gently tugged at Eric's jacket. "Together?" Eric nodded. The next day, the girl woke up very late. The exhausted girl was still in a sweet dream with a smile on her face. Eric kissed Jennifer Aniston on the corner of her mouth before gently putting on his clothes. After making a simple breakfast, Jennifer Aniston still did not wake up. Eric looked at his watch and had to put away Jennifer Aniston's portion and eat first. "Jenny, I'm leaving." After breakfast, Eric walked into the bedroom and lay beside the girl's pillow. He gently stroked the girl's drooping, messy hair. "Oh, don't be so noisy. I want to sleep." The girl groggily protested and impatiently pulled the blanket over her head. "Okay, I'll call you when I get to Los Angeles," Eric said again. Seeing that the lazy bum still did not respond, he thought for a while and found a pen and paper to write a note and put it in a conspicuous place. Only then did he reluctantly pick up his luggage and leave Jennifer Aniston's apartment. After getting into the taxi, Eric looked up at the window of Jennifer Aniston's apartment. Due to the backlight, it was completely dark. Behind the window, the girl was wrapped in a blanket. She held the note tightly in her hand as she watched the taxi leave. She sighed and tossed around in distress. She grabbed the pillow next to her and hit it a few times. Let's go. Bastard. Even pretending to be asleep couldn't make you stay for a little longer. Too hateful." Shortly after getting off the plane, Eric only stopped for a short while to contact his private lawyer. He then left Los Angeles with jobs again and headed to Richmond, California in the San Francisco Bay. Due to the increasing shortage of funds, Pixar's headquarters was also moved into a small corner of Richmond by Jobs. At the same time, Pretty Woman was raking in the box office in North America at a speed visible to the naked eye. After 3 days of popularity over the weekend, people's enthusiasm for watching the movie didn't diminish at all on weekdays. Especially on Valentine's Day, many cinemas showing Pretty Woman were full. Amidst the envy and jealousy of other film companies, Pretty Woman's box office figures were officially announced a week later. The box office for the first week totaled $29.07 million. Although it was a pity that it didn't reach $30 million, it still surpassed the first week box office of Eric's previous film, Home Alone. In the second week of release, under the watchful eyes of many people, Pretty Woman's box office fell to $17 million, a drop of 43%. This figure made many people breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it wasn't another Home Alone. Otherwise, it would have been too crazy. But in the next few weeks, Pretty Woman's box office didn't fall as sharply as it did in the second week. A month later, Pretty Woman's North American box office had accumulated more than $75 million. There was no doubt that it would break the $100 million mark. According to the estimates of some statistical agencies, as long as there were no other box office dark horses, the box office of the movie was likely to break the $200 million mark again. Under Fox's operation, Pretty Woman was also released in the overseas market. Although it missed Valentine's Day in most regions, under the influence of the North American market's reputation, the movie's overseas box office momentum was stronger than in North America. Within 4 weeks, it broke the $100 million mark. In less than a year, Eric shot 2 movies that created box office miracles. Once again, Eric became the focus of the media's attention. The Los Angeles Times directly used the title, "The Boy Wonder Who Broke into Hollywood," to do a detailed report on Eric's deeds in less than a year. Many well-known media outlets and magazines contacted Jeffrey and Kapoor when they couldn't contact Eric himself, hoping to do an exclusive interview with Eric himself. However, they were all rejected. Although Eric hadn't reached the heights of people like Barry Diller and Michael Eisner for the time being, he believed that day wasn't too far away. who had seen these powerful big shots active in the media all day long. Hiding behind the scenes and being a black hand that manipulated all living things was Eric's ultimate goal. With no hope of interviewing Eric, the media could only settle for the next best thing and turn their attention to others. Chapter 81. Without a doubt, the actor who benefited the most was Julia Roberts. With the release of Wind and Moon, Julia felt like she had entered an unprecedented world. In this new world, everyone was so respectful and courteous to her, treating her like a princess. When she was recording a talk show on ABC, the entire production team revolved around her. The director seriously asked for her opinion on every detail of the recording process. At the same time, lucrative movie contracts, advertising contracts, endorsements, and other kinds of invitations came one after another. With the release of the box office on the first weekend, her salary directly jumped to $5 million, a figure that many male stars could only dream of. Al Pacino had also completely shaken off the shadow of his failure 4 years ago. He was in high spirits. Some of his friends in the industry who hadn't contacted him in a long time suddenly popped up, and parties came one after another. Of course, there were those who were happy and those who were disappointed. Richard Gere, who had already begun to promote the new film, Dragons Killing Formation, was undoubtedly the most disappointed. His manager had previously praised the Dragons Killing Formation project to the heavens, and at the same time, criticized Eric's new film as being completely useless. Although Richard Gere knew why his agent did this, he felt that by rejecting Eric's invitation, he could do Michael Ovitz a favor. So he chose Dragons Killing Formation. If Wind and Moon hadn't been such a huge success, Richard Gere wouldn't have felt much even if it was just a small box office hit. Unfortunately, Wind and Moon succeeded, and it was a huge success. The first week's revenue was comparable to the total box office of many movies. Seeing this, Richard Gere couldn't stay calm anymore. This uneasiness made him forget that it was his own choice to give up on Wind and Moon. If the artist insisted on taking on a movie contract, CAA would make things difficult for the artist, but they couldn't force the actor to stop the act. But Richard Gere still naturally blamed CAA for everything. He felt like he had become the victim of Michael Ovitz's personal power play. At Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta, an important meeting for Colombia was being held. At this time, the president of Coca-Cola, Guasaida, was holding some information about the two movies, Home Alone and Pretty Woman. He questioned the president of Colombia, Blunt Cohen, one by one. The VM agreement is your first mistake. Of course, with the profits of Home Alone, Colombia's stock price has risen from $12 to $14. This mistake can be considered as offsetting. After Guasaida finished speaking, he switched to another document and continued, but following that, your wrong behavior directly caused Eric Williams to switch to Fox. According to the agency's estimates, Wind and Moon's North American box office may reach $200 million, and the overseas box office may exceed the North American domestic box office by 50%. Just the box office alone can bring in at least $80 million of profit for Fox. All of this should have gone to Colombia. Blunt Cohen did not dare to refute. He quietly waited for the final decision of the Coca-Cola board of directors. In fact, he already knew the outcome. The senior management of the film company seemed to be in the limelight, but very few people knew the enormous pressure they were facing behind them. Every time a movie was released, it would bring about a change in the top management. Some people directly packed up and left because of huge losses, never to recover from the setback. Some people were promoted to higher positions because of the success of their projects. Of course, they still have to worry about the upcoming projects. Blunt Cohen also knew that Eric Williams was just a trigger, or an excuse, for him to face the current situation of being blamed. Most importantly, Blunt Cohen was against Coca-Cola selling Colombia to Japan. According to some sources, Coca-Cola's board of directors had decided to start the acquisition negotiations with Sony. Under this situation, Blunt Cohen does not care if he changes his position. Anyway, he will be selling Colombia to Japan soon. However, in order to protect his position, he had contacted many people and wanted to boycott this deal. This matter could not be hidden from the senior management of Coca-Cola. Once they succeed, no one will say anything. But if they fail, they will have to face the consequences. Therefore, I will now announce the decision of the board of directors. Mr. Blunt Cohen will be relieved of his position as the CEO of Columbia. TriStar Pictures effective immediately. Guasaida finished reading the board's resolution and discussed some other topics before adjourning the meeting. As for Blunt Cohen as the president, he was not escorted back to the Columbia headquarters in Los Angeles to pack his luggage by the security guards. Blunt Cohen left with a desolate look on his face. Guasaida, on the other hand, didn't leave. Instead, he went to another reception room. Mr. Guasaida, nice to meet you. The woman who was sitting on the sofa stood up and greeted Guasaida warmly. Guasaida shook hands with her and smiled. Sorry to keep you waiting, Amy. It's okay. I had just arrived. This woman was Amy Pascal, who had left Columbia not long ago. My assistant has already told you my intentions. AI me, what do you think? Amy Pascal asked. Mr. Guasaida, I feel that there is no need for me to return to Columbia. Although I had resigned, I still heard some news that Columbia will be sold to Sony. In this case, why should I go back? Wait for a few months and get laid off again? Of course not, Amy. You are a very talented manager. Even if the Japanese took over Columbia, they would not dare to make too many changes. I know how you left Columbia. If Blunt Cohen had listened to your advice, there would not have been that VM agreement that cost Columbia tens of millions of profits. And after that, there will be no Eric Williams who will switch to Fox. Amy Pascal said. Mr. Guasaida, there is no point in talking about this now. I want to know the real reason why you asked me to return to Columbia. Guasaida looked at Amy and said, Amy, you know Eric Williams, right? Sure enough. Amy Pascal confirmed her guess and nodded. Yes, but we've only met a few times. Maybe Eric doesn't even remember me now. Oh, how is that possible? If it was not for your help, how could there be a box office miracle? Although Amy Pascal did not get any benefits from it, and she even lost her job because of it. But when Guasaida mentioned this, she was still proud. Mr. Guasaida, if you want me to persuade Eric Williams to switch to Columbia, it is not possible. Everyone knows that Eric had signed 3 contracts with Fox this year. Next year, Columbia will be in the hands of Sony. Guasaida shook his head and said, Of course not. I had asked my people to look into the contract. In fact, the contract is not strict. Fox only wants to get the distribution rights for the second movie of. So they did not prohibit Eric Williams from working with other film companies during his cooperation with Fox. After the negotiations with Sony, Columbia needs some good news to stimulate the share price. For example, a blockbuster movie. But, don't worry, Amy. I know you have some concerns. In order to work with Eric Williams smoothly, the board of directors had removed Blunt Cohen as the CEO of Columbia. Amy Pascal asked in surprise, Really? Guasaida nodded. Of course. If not, with Blunt Cohen's connections, the board of directors will not make such a big fuss. Anyway, he will not be in that position for long. When you talk to Eric Williams, you can tell him about this to show our sincerity. Amy Pascal thought of another problem. I feel that Eric Williams's production speed is very fast. But 3 movies a year should be his limit. If he produces more movies, how can we guarantee the quality? We will release his new movie during the summer. With his current fame, as long as the movie is not too bad, it should not be a problem for him to get $100 million at the box office during the summer. Also, Guasaida lowered his voice. I will provide enough budget for Fox's second movie. We can even get someone to film it for him. He just needs to focus on the movie for us. Amy Pascal hesitated for a while and nodded. I will try my best. Chapter 82. Eric had been in Richmond, California for 3 days. In the past few days, he had hired a team of professionals from Silicon Valley to conduct a detailed investigation and evaluation of Pixar's assets. Jobs was eager to complete the deal and expressed his dissatisfaction with Eric's unnecessary behavior. But there was nothing he could do. Eric was not in the mood to care about Jobs' feelings. While Jobs' talent was undeniable, his character was really not flattering. He was someone who could publicly claim that he was impotent in order to refuse to pay for the support of his illegitimate daughter. Therefore, it was impossible for Eric to complete the deal hastily without conducting a detailed evaluation of Pixar. 3 days later, in Pixar's single-story office building in Richmond, Eric placed a thick stack of evaluation documents on the conference table. He tapped his fingers on the table and said to Jobs, who was sitting across from him, "Steve, I was very sincere about acquiring Pixar. Unfortunately, I don't see your sincerity." Jobs was not affected by Eric's tone at all. With a helpless look on his face, he said, "Eric, if you have any doubts, you can tell me, and I will seriously answer them for you. It's too serious to directly accuse me of not being sincere." Eric sighed at Jobs's psychological quality. No matter what was going on in his mind, he did not show any fear on the surface. Even he, who had lived 2 lifetimes, found it difficult to achieve this level of calmness. He was not in the mood to play psychological warfare with Jobs, so he went straight to the point. "Okay, Steve, I'll be direct. The reason I want to acquire Pixar is because of Pixar's 3D animation technology. Therefore, I don't mind that you have already sold the hardware department." As Eric spoke, he flipped through the documents in his hands and continued, "However, the information I have collected shows that in the graphics rendering software package developed by Pixar, the ownership of 3 core software was transferred to your next computer company some time ago. The most important animation system, although the core software is still there, the ownership of a coloring software has also been transferred. The reason Pixar was able to get the 2D animation outsourcing project from Disney was because of this software that could greatly reduce the coloring time. Do you need to give me an explanation for this?" It was true that Jobs was not an honest man. He had done this because he wanted to take a chance and fool Eric, a layman. Once it was successful, the software could be sold for millions of dollars. Perhaps some people would wonder how much these few pieces of software were worth. If you have any doubts, think of Microsoft. But what Jobs did not expect was that Eric, who was indeed a layman, knew how to leave things to the experts, so he specifically hired a professional evaluation team from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was a place where tech geeks gathered, and where there was a lot of intrigue. Those people quickly discovered Jobs's little trick. In fact, after Eric made this move, Jobs did not have much hope in his heart. But with his thick skin, even if he was exposed, he definitely wouldn't give in so easily. "Eric, in the 4 years since I took over Pixar, I have invested at least $50 million into the company. The hardware department only sold for $16 million. And your asking price is only $20 million. That's only enough to buy what I left at Pixar." Eric laughed mockingly, closed the folder, put his hands on the table, and stared at Jobs. "Steve, it seems that you still don't want to admit your failure so easily. All right, let me make it clear. You failed to acquire Pixar from Lucas. Losers should have the awareness of losers. Losses are inevitable. In order to save your next computer company, you have to sell me the complete Pixar software department at a low price. So return the software, and we can talk about other things." Jobs's face changed several times. As an extremely proud and conceited person, he had always been the one to point and curse at others. Now that he was being called a loser by a teenager more than 10 years younger than him, even with his superior mental fortitude, it was difficult for him to keep a straight face. On the other hand, John Lasseter and the others, who were pretending to be busy working in the workshop outside, were actually eavesdropping on the conversation between the 2 men. Jobs had never been an amiable boss. Every time he came to Pixar, he would grab all the main creatives, criticize their work, and then throw down a check like a handout in exchange for taking back some of the management's shares. Over the years, through these tactics, Pixar had become Jobs's personal property, and he had taken away all the shares in the hands of the management. Now he finally saw Jobs being scolded. Based on this point alone, the awkwardness of having to work under a young man immediately disappeared. In the conference room, Jobs said with a straight face, "Mr. Williams, you bought Pixar to make animated movies, right? You've had great success with several movies in a row, and I'm sure a lot of people are watching your every move. If I leak the news that you're interested in Pixar, maybe a lot of people will be interested and offer a higher price. What do you think?" Eric's ring finger on his right hand trembled slightly. Fortunately, this detail was not noticed by Jobs. Eric shook off the worry in his heart and sneered without hesitation. "Mr. Jobs, your words are worth $1 million. I don't like it when people make things difficult for me, so I've decided to reduce the offer to $19 million. Pixar was actually like a camera. Under my command, it could shoot Home Alone and Pretty Woman. But in the hands of other directors, it's hard to say what would happen. So $19 million for the complete Pixar software department. If you've made up your mind, call me before I leave Richmond." After Eric finished speaking, he packed up his personal belongings and walked out of the Pixar office. Edward, the private lawyer, hurriedly followed. After a long time, Jobs walked out of the conference room, glanced coldly at the employees who were working or pretending to work, and left the Pixar headquarters in silence. The next morning, Eric and Jobs sat in the conference room again. Many business negotiations were like this, always going through several rounds of confrontation. Even though they had quarreled fiercely the last time, almost to the point of swinging their arms and fighting each other, when the next round began, everyone still had to gather their emotions and sit together to continue the game. Today, Jobs had obvious dark circles under his eyes. "Eric, what I did before was not wrong. Everyone will do their best for their own interests. But I agree to return the software, but the price will remain the same at $20 million. We are all rational adults. We can't reduce the price by $1 million because of one sentence. That's what children do." Eric did not want to push Jobs too hard. If things went south, he could spend money to set up another animation studio, but developing the corresponding software and accumulating enough technology would not only require a lot of money, but it would also take years. Although Eric was not short of money, he did not have enough time to accumulate technology. In his previous life, everyone knew that 3D animation movies and their peripherals could bring in huge profits, but there were only a few well-known animation studios in Hollywood, because they were far ahead of their peers in terms of technology and dominated the market. It was very difficult for others to catch up. If you worked for a few years and finally reached a certain level, other people's technology would be years ahead of you. In this case, it would never be easy for latecomers to catch up with their predecessors. In the conference room, the two argued for half an hour. Eric could not take back what he had said yesterday. In the end, both sides made a small concession and reached a price of $19.5 million. After taking back the ownership of the software, Eric had someone confirm again that there was no mistake before he signed the contract. Jobs put the check away, looked at his employees who had worked for him for several years, and felt that there was nothing to say. He nodded and turned to leave the Pixar headquarters. Chapter 83. I'm not a talented speaker, and I'm not good at saying inspiring things. I can only promise you one thing. Within 3 years, as long as you don't have any problems with your work, Pixar will not lay off any employees. After Jobs left, Eric said this to all the employees in the open plan office. This was also the issue that they were most concerned about. In the past year or so, Pixar had laid off several batches of employees due to the lack of funds. Sure enough, after Eric made this promise, many people breathed a sigh of relief. Everyone knew Eric's identity. This young man in front of them was now someone who did not lack money. Since he had made such a promise, he would not go back on his word easily. Okay, now everyone get back to work. All management, come to the conference room for a meeting. After a brief commotion, the core of Pixar, led by John Lasseter, gathered in the conference room. I'm sure everyone knows me. Also, when I read the materials before, I did a certain understanding of you, so we can skip the introductions for the time being. There was a low chuckle in the conference room. Eric waited for a while with a smile and said, Pixar was in a very bad situation before, but it won't be anymore. You may all be curious about why I bought Pixar. I told John about this. I'm interested in 3D animated movies, and I just happened to have money to invest, so I did it. I'm sure you won't doubt my vision in movies. According to Pixar's previous short film, Tin Soldiers, I thought of a very good long story idea. The rich young master had a house full of toys. Because Cowboy Woody was the most popular, He naturally became the boss of all the toys. But suddenly one day, the young master brought home another new toy, Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear looked novel and had advanced functions. The young master loved it so much that he couldn't put it down. As a result, it threatened Woody's position as the boss, so Woody began to think of ways to get rid of Buzz Lightyear. Coincidentally, the two toys fell out of the room and into the hands of another neighbor's child who liked to treat toys roughly. After spending a few minutes explaining the story of Toy Story, Eric continued, "The last time I met with John, I mentioned to him that I would invest $30 million in this 3D animated movie. Of course, the budget can be increased. I just need you to make this animation the best it can be. It doesn't matter to me if I fail once, but I think Pixar can't afford to fail anymore." The executives of Pixar all had solemn expressions on their faces. Previously, Pixar could not make ends meet. If 3D animation was not successful, it would be difficult for Pixar to continue to exist independently. Eric was very satisfied with everyone's reaction. Although he knew that 3D animation would become the mainstream of animated movies in the near future, these people would definitely not believe him if he said it to encourage them. He might as well change his tone to give them some pressure. "I know that the production cycle of animated movies is very long. I plan to give you 3 years to produce this movie. Within 3 years, there will be no changes to Pixar. You don't need to take on any advertising projects to maintain Pixar's operations. You can focus all your energy on the production of Toy Story. Alright, that's all I have to say. Now what do you think?" The pressure that Jobs left behind still made the executives of Pixar feel a lingering fear. After carefully asking a few questions, they were sure that Eric and Jobs were two completely different types of people. They finally let go of themselves and began to speak freely. Because they were too engrossed in the discussion, everyone forgot about lunchtime. It was only when the sun set and the light in the conference room dimmed that everyone realized that it was already dark. In order to ensure that Toy Story would not deviate too much from his previous life, Eric stayed in Richmond for another 3 days. During this time, he personally wrote the complete script of Toy Story. He also hand-drew the shapes of Woody, Buzz Lightyear, and other toys and handed them to the Pixar production staff. It was not until the president of Fox, Barry Diller, personally called to remind Eric, who had disappeared for almost a week, to attend the celebration party for Pretty Woman, that he had to leave Richmond. It was not that Eric did not think about moving Pixar to Los Angeles. He privately mentioned it to John Lasseter, but the result was that it was difficult to implement. Most of the technical staff of Pixar lived in San Francisco Bay for a long time. They were used to everything here, and many of them even settled down here. Moreover, the environment of Los Angeles was not suitable for an animation studio like Pixar. However, Richmond was close to Silicon Valley, where high-tech companies gathered, and was more suitable for the survival of Pixar. When Eric heard John Lasseter's explanation, he gave up his original plan. Anyway, San Francisco was only 500 or 600 kilometers away from Los Angeles, and it was only an hour by plane. It was convenient to go back and forth, so Eric did not insist. After staying in a hotel for a week, Eric finally returned home and took a comfortable shower. There were still a few hours before the celebration party in the evening, and he was too lazy to prepare anything. He leaned on the sofa in the living room in loose casual clothes, lazily reached for the remote control, and turned on the TV. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard the doorbell ring. He opened the door, and a sneaky girl wearing a wig, sunglasses, and very ordinary clothes waited anxiously at the door, looking around from time to time. "Why did you open the door so slowly? It would be bad if the paparazzi found out." Eric looked at Julia's outfit and stepped aside to let the girl in. "Why are you dressed like this? Oh, you look a bit like Allison?" "I asked Allison to dress up as me and leave first, so that we could get rid of the paparazzi." Julia's tone was a little smug. "What do you want to drink?" Eric asked when they came to the living room and walked to the fridge. "Coffee, no sugar. Don't make the water too hot." "Oh," Eric responded and poured a glass of juice for Julia. The girl rolled her eyes at him speechlessly, but she still took the juice. "You're always so despicable." Eric leaned back on the sofa again and looked at Julia with interest. You've changed a lot. Look at the way you sit and listen to the way you talk. You look like a top Hollywood actress. I can't help but want to ask you for an autograph. No problem. Where do you want to sign? Julia magically took out a pen from her pocket. Eric looked at the ceiling for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Then he suddenly pulled open the belt of his casual pants and looked inside. He shook his head and said, "No, I don't have feelings for you. I can't sign it." Tooey. The girl blushed and spat at Eric. She picked up the juice and sipped it with a flustered look in her eyes. After a while, Julia put down the cup. "I heard you bought an animation studio?" "Yes. It's too tiring to make live-action movies, so I plan to direct animated movies instead." The girl glared at Eric and said, "Can you be more serious? We're already so familiar with each other. Who am I being serious for?" Eric said and sat up straight. He asked, "Okay, why are you looking for me?" Chapter 84. I want to know why you asked Kapoor to turn down all those offers. If it weren't for some people handing the scripts directly to me, I wouldn't even know that I'd received these offers. Julia became more and more agitated as she spoke. In the end, she pointed directly at Eric's nose and denounced him. Disney's Lost LA City offered $6 million US, but you rejected it without asking for my opinion. $6 million US. How can you be so overbearing? I'm not your puppet, so please show me some respect. Eric leaned back on the sofa and let the girl vent her emotions like a crazy kitten. At the same time, he thought of Disney's Lost LA City and couldn't help but laugh. The screenwriter of this script was called J. F. Lawton, who was the original screenwriter of Pretty Woman in his previous life. During the days he was in Richmond, many film companies ignored CAA's ban on UTA and issued offers to Julia, Al, and a few other Wind and Moon leads. If UTA only had some mediocre actors, the Hollywood studio might be wary of Michael Ovitz's influence and refused to use UTA actors with the thought that it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. But now, with the popularity of Wind and Moon, UTA had two pillars in Julia and Al. Other supporting actors like Jason Alexander also had some fame. Driven by profits, many film companies ignored CAA's misgivings, especially the big six film companies that hated CAA but couldn't do anything about it. Eric even maliciously guessed that the Big Six had issued a series of offers to UTA actors with the intention of making Michael Ovitz unhappy. Al Pacino patiently waited for Eric's promise of knowing a woman by smelling her scent. So he directly turned down all his offers, and Al didn't have any objections. Julia, on the other hand, couldn't be so rash. Among the scripts that he received, Kapoor filtered through them and excluded those that had very low offers and looked like bad movies at first glance. The rest of the scripts were communicated with Eric over the phone. Hence, Eric naturally found out about the script for Lost in Luoyang City. When he heard the screenwriter's name, out of curiosity, Eric specially got Kapoor to fax him a copy of the script. J. F. Lawton had obviously changed the original 3000 into a love story with the male lead as the main storyline. As mentioned before, in the original space-time, the original script of Wind and Moon was a dark drama called 3000 that reflected the living conditions of several women in Los Angeles. In the end, it was modified into a romantic comedy during the filming process. As for this Lost in LA City, the outline of the story was that the male lead went to Los Angeles on a business trip. In the end, not only did he get lost, all his luggage was stolen. The male lead, who was quite successful in his career but was an idiot in his life, was temporarily taken in by a kind-hearted woman. After some twists and turns, another pair of Prince and Cinderella walked together happily. In any case, Eric could tell at a glance that this story was in the same vein as Wind and Moon. However, he couldn't say that it was plagiarized because the story was changed quite cleverly. A movie giant like Disney wouldn't let Eric have any evidence of plagiarism. In Eric's opinion, this story that was very similar to Wind and Moon definitely wouldn't lose money if it was made with Julia as the female lead again. After all, the movie's budget wasn't high. However, it was basically impossible for it to become a box office hit again like Wind and Moon. It was like a person who had just eaten a bowl of rice and was already full. If it was an apple or a glass of juice, they might still be able to eat, but if it was a bowl of rice... Hey, are you listening to me? How can you still laugh? The girl's questioning voice rang in his ears. Eric pulled himself back from his daze and saw that Julia had already leaned over to him with a faint anger on her face. Are you done? Eric looked into the girl's eyes and asked seriously. Uh-huh. Julia nodded. When their eyes met, the girl suddenly realized that she had lost her composure and quickly sat back down obediently. These days, she was used to hearing flattery and praise, so she couldn't help but feel a little arrogant. However, when she saw Eric's serious expression, the girl suddenly remembered that this guy in front of her didn't need to flatter her. Instead, she was the one who, thinking of this, Julia couldn't help but hug her arms and rub them twice. She lowered her head slightly and glanced at Eric guiltily. During the days I was in Richmond, I talked to Kapoor on the phone for a period of time every day. AL's next movie has already been decided, so the discussions were all about your movie contracts. As for Lost and Now, I even specially asked Kapoor to fax me a script so I could read it carefully. When Julia heard that Eric was so concerned about her in private, she felt a little guilty for her behavior just now. I'm sorry. The girl apologized in a mosquito-like voice. Eric waved his hand and said, I'm not asking for credit. I just want to tell you that I haven't forgotten the promise I made that night. I said I would make a girl named Julia Roberts reach the level of legendary Hollywood actresses like Vivien Leigh and Audrey Hepburn. I'm sorry. The girl's voice sounded again. But I'm a little disappointed in you now. This is only your first success, and you're already so impatient. What do you want to do? Eric's calm tone gradually became reprimanding. The girl couldn't help but want to refute. Eric interrupted the girl's words and said, Now you have fame. Just like you said, Disney has already offered you a salary of US $6 million. Not many actresses in Hollywood can reach this level. If you're short on money, go get a loan. The bank is quite generous to Hollywood stars. What you have to do is carefully consolidate your position. If you want to go further, you can't be too cautious. I understand. No, you still don't understand. I feel like you've been wronged. Take Lost and Now, for example. US $6 million is indeed a very high price. Tom Hanks only got US $2 million from Flying Across the Future, which broke the $100 million box office last year. But if you take on this movie, it's equivalent to using up the box office appeal you accumulated with Wind and Moon. It's not a matter of 1 + 1 = 2, but a matter of subtraction. Have you ever seen a celebrity take on two movies that are almost exactly the same in such a short period of time? And both movies are very successful? This principle is the same as those blockbuster movies in Hollywood. They all wait a few years for the audience's expectations to reach the highest level before shooting a sequel. Chapter 85. After pausing for a moment, Eric felt a little thirsty. He got up and grabbed a can of beer from the fridge. He drank a few mouthfuls and returned to the sofa. Just as he was about to continue, he looked at the girl opposite him and immediately shut his mouth. She's crying. He helplessly reached under the coffee table and took out a box of tissues. He then pushed it over. Okay, don't cry. I won't say any more. However, this sentence had the opposite effect. Julia pulled out a few tissues to cover her little face, and her tears flowed even more vigorously. She even started to sob a little. According to a normal plot, at this time, the woman would need a shoulder or something. Then, she would say a few words of love and find a small dark room to have sex. However, it seemed that Julia was the one who cried. Eric felt that he shouldn't be in a position to do this, right? Thus, the scene was a bit of a stalemate. One sat there and looked at the other helplessly, while the other cried. As a woman, she felt that she was too stupid. She was embarrassed and angry, so she used her tears to wrap herself up. This was normal. You bastard, give me a way out and comfort me a few more times. Wouldn't that be better? But why did it feel so awkward now? A few minutes later, the girl had no choice but to stop crying. She wiped her face and threw the tissues at the man opposite her. You're a bastard. Then, she stood up and walked to the bathroom in a hurry. My makeup is ruined. Sigh, I must look ugly. After touching up her makeup, she fidgeted in the bathroom for a while. Then, she walked out like a new wife and sat down in her original position. You don't dare to scold me anymore, humph. I will try to find a suitable script for you as soon as possible. Don't be so anxious. If you feel bored, you can sign up for some simple classes. This will help to shape your image. The public still likes motivated female celebrities. Of course, you can also accept some variety shows. You'll have to ask Kapoor about this. I'm just saying whatever comes to mind. He's a professional agent. Okay. Julia nodded obediently. By the way, have you seen a psychiatrist? Julia shook her head and glared at Eric. It's all this bastard's fault. After the movie was released, she finally had some free time. She took some time to do some research and found out what the so-called Stockholm Syndrome was. The examples given in the book seemed absurd to her, but in connection with her own aberrations she was forced to acknowledge the fact. At the same time, the release of Wind and Moon quickly turned her from a small-time actress to a big star. She was even more afraid to find a psychiatrist. If the psychiatrist accidentally revealed her illness, her fledgling acting career might be over. How could the public approve of such an actress? Therefore, Julia didn't even dare to tell the people closest to her. Currently, only Eric and her knew about this. Eric quickly understood Julia's concerns. This matter was indeed very tricky. Once outsiders found out, a scandal would be unavoidable. This kind of thing should have a lot to do with self-confidence. I think that when you first came to my house, you were already in a good state. You were so overbearing. If you continue like this, you might recover without any medicine. You nonsense. I've done some research. This is all your fault. If you hadn't treated me like that night, this wouldn't have happened. Eric raised his hands in surrender. Okay, it's all my fault. It's your fault. Seeing Eric's awkward expression, Julia was quite proud. By the way, why isn't Drew Barrymore here? Isn't it the weekend? She lives in a boarding school, so she doesn't have to go home on weekends. She probably doesn't know that I'm coming back today. The girl likes to play. When I'm not home, she's rarely alone at home. Julia's tone was sour. You're so good to her. Eric smiled. You're not the first to say that. The girl is now my creditor. She owes me 1,000,000 yuan. These days, the one who owes the debt is the boss. I have to support her. Fox is having a celebration party at the Hilton Hotel tonight. Are you going? Of course. Julia nodded and looked at her watch. It's getting late. I have to go back. Eric helped the girl disguise herself again and sent Julia out before returning to the villa. He watched TV in boredom for a while. When the sun was setting, Eric went upstairs to change his clothes and drove to the Hilton Hotel. A celebration party for a movie like Wind and Moon, which had a huge box office hit, would definitely be the focus of the paparazzi. Eric didn't like dealing with paparazzi either. He planned to take the elevator in the parking lot directly to the banquet hall, but he suddenly realized that he had forgotten to ask which floor the party was on. He looked around. There was no one else in the parking lot. He couldn't ask the camera above his head. Eric waited in the parking lot for a while, unwilling to give up, hoping to meet a guest who was also attending the party. Unfortunately, his luck wasn't very good. After waiting for a few minutes, no one appeared. If he waited any longer, he would probably be noticed by the camera above his head and be treated as a car thief. He walked out of the parking lot helplessly and was surrounded by a group of paparazzi. The Hilton Hotel's security guards did their job and quickly came to help Eric block the crowd. While frantically pressing the shutter, the paparazzi asked a mess of questions at the top of their lungs. Director Williams, you disappeared for a week. Were you preparing for your next movie? Eric, is Miss Julia Roberts your girlfriend? How did she get the lead role in Wind and Moon? Lamborghini announced that 153 units of the latest monster sports car were booked in a week. Eric, will you continue to do product placement for your next movie? Eric, why didn't Miss Drew Barrymore come with you? Kind, malicious, and full of traps. All kinds of questions were buzzing around his ears. It was difficult for Eric to give an appropriate answer under the circumstances, so he didn't dare to say a word. He walked forward in silence under the protection of the security guards. When he entered the Hilton Hotel, the paparazzi took the initiative to stop. The Hilton Hotel's manager greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Williams, welcome. Wind and Moon's celebration party is on the 4th floor. Do you need me to take you there personally?" Eric quickly shook his head. "No, I can go there myself." After entering the elevator and pressing the button, Eric still saw the same manager looking at him with a smile. "What's going on?" It was actually very simple. The manager also happened to watch Wind and Moon. He had a good impression of Eric because of the cool hotel manager Bernie Thompson portrayed by Eric in the movie. Chapter 86. After the champagne was popped, the party officially began. As a movie project that could bring hundreds of millions of dollars in profits for Fox, even the current president of Fox, Barry Diller, had to attend the celebration party for Wind and Moon in person. In addition to the Wind and Moon crew, Fox also invited dozens of celebrities, big and small, to support them. The party could be said to be star-studded. However, there were a lot of big shots present, so the banquet hall with hundreds of people was orderly. The guests gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and talked about their own topics. Eric, the publicity department, was really too conservative about the Super Bowl trailer. "I promise that when your next movie is released, Fox will fully cooperate with you. Don't say next time. This time, you can also count it in the publicity and reimburse me." Eric cursed in his heart, but he had a smile on his face. "Mr. Diller, let's not talk about this anymore. A $1.5 million Super Bowl advertising fee is indeed a big expense. It's understandable that Fox is conservative." Barry Diller chuckled and didn't mention it again. This old fox. The topic changed again to Eric's next movie. After Wind and Moon, although Eric's next movie hadn't even been seen, Fox had naturally scheduled it for the summer. This year's summer was full of blockbusters. Warner's Batman, Paramount's Raiders of the Lost Ark 3, and Columbia's Ghostbusters 2 were destined to be big box office hits. On the other hand, Fox had diverted too much attention to the development of the television network. As a result, the total number of films produced and released this year was only slightly more than 10. They were ranked last among the Big Six. In order to not be last in terms of movie performance, Fox was destined to fully support Eric's movie, especially after the success of Wind and Moon. It wasn't easy to get a high box office hit with summer blockbusters. Eric couldn't take the sequel to the already famous Home Alone to compete with these blockbusters during the summer. After thinking for a long time, he decided on an idea he had before. "I already have a preliminary plot outline for the next movie. I plan to invite Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. This will be a drama between two men." Barry Diller narrowed his eyes. If it was a success, with the two Toms and Eric's box office appeal, the box office of the movie was guaranteed to be at least $100 million. In addition to The Kid in Charge 2, at the end of the year, there would be 3 blockbuster movies in a year. Fox's performance in the film industry would no longer be faulted, and he could develop the television network without worry. "Eric, if you want to invite 2 Toms, the pay for the 2 of them will be at least $10 million, right? What's your budget?" Eric thought for a moment. "It shouldn't be more than $30 million. This is a drama film. There aren't any big scenes, and it doesn't need any special effects. It completely depends on the individual performances of the 2 male leads. So $30 million is already a very generous budget. It's very likely that we won't be able to finish spending it. I heard you just spent a lot of money to buy Steve Jobs' studio." Although Barry Diller's question was somewhat irrelevant, Eric immediately understood what Barry Diller meant. Fox still wanted to invest in the film. "That's right, I asked Pixar to make a title logo for my film company. After seeing it, I was very satisfied. I heard that Pixar was in trouble and wanted to make a move. I happen to be very interested in animated films, so I bought it. But the cycle for animated films is very long, and 3D animation is still in the exploration stage, so I don't know when the first animated film will be produced." Eric ignored the faint helplessness on Barry Diller's face. "Anyway, if you're beating around the bush, I'll play drift for you." Listening to the little fox in front of him talking nonsense, Barry Diller had to make the topic clear. Eric, I mean, if you're tight on funds for the next film, Fox can be responsible for part of the investment. This can also reduce the risk. And don't worry, Fox won't link the investment with the cost of publicity. The agreement we signed before will remain unchanged. Since Barry Diller made the matter clear, Eric couldn't refuse directly. Of course, he wouldn't give up his own interests. If Barry Diller could think of something, Eric certainly could too. If the two Toms were successful, the film wouldn't fail with the appeal of the box office of the three people. In the end, Eric could only say perfunctorily, "No problem, Mr. Diller. If you need external investment, Fox will definitely be my first choice." Barry Diller also saw Eric's perfunctory attitude and understood that the possibility of Fox investing was almost zero. But he wouldn't do anything stupid like Columbia. The two sides were still in the honeymoon stage of cooperation. Although according to the previous agreement, Eric earned a little more than Fox, but Fox also captured a huge amount of profit that was enough to make others envious. After talking about some other topics, the two separated to entertain others. As soon as Barry Diller walked away, Eric felt a lot of eyes on him. "Okay girls, throw yourself at me. Whoever hits on me first today, I'll give you a role in the next movie." Eric had a ridiculous idea in his mind. At the same time, he enjoyed the feeling of being the center of attention. At the end of the day, he was still a normal person. If he didn't have any vanity, why would he bother? Soon he had the first person hitting on him. He was bald, 8 feet tall, and had a strong back. He had a wretched smile on his face, and the most F***ing thing was that he was a man. "Eric, you're finally back. I want to know what you're thinking." "I thought a few of Julia's movie contracts were good, but you rejected them all?" It wasn't easy for him to decide to indulge himself. Eric was helplessly pulled to the side by Caper. "Caper, don't you feel like you've been pierced by thousands of arrows?" Look around." Caper looked around suspiciously and found a few beautiful girls who weren't good at hiding their emotions staring at him with unfriendly gazes. Although Caper was a workaholic, he was still very well versed in the ways of the world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become an agent. He shrugged and said, "Sorry, Eric, I'm holding you back. But if you don't explain this to me clearly, I won't feel at ease." Eric also wanted to explain to him that most of Julia's more successful movies in his previous life were romantic comedies. She had just filmed Wind and Moon. It wouldn't be suitable for her to make another movie in such a short period of time. Thus, he couldn't take out those movies from his previous life for the time being. He felt that the most suitable movie for Julia was Steel Magnolias, which had been nominated for a Golden Globe. It was a movie that had both box office and reputation. Unfortunately, he had checked before and found that TriStar Pictures hadn't started this project yet. Either it had been blown away by the butterfly effect, or it hadn't started filming yet. It was also impossible for him to write the script again. For the previous 3 movies, he was 100% sure that the original script hadn't appeared yet, or that it didn't have much to do with his movie. Only then did he feel at ease using it. But now he couldn't guarantee this movie. "Caper, wait a few more days. I plan to go to the Writers Guild to see if there are any good registered scripts and pick one for Julia." The corner of Caper's mouth twitched. "Eric, do you know how many registered scripts there are at the Writers Guild? There are tens of thousands. I feel like I'm going to San Francisco to find a few tons of gold. Is that even possible?" Knowing where the gold was buried, it was naturally easy to find it. Eric just wanted to check if the screenwriter of Steel Magnolias had registered the script. "Trust me, Caper. Be patient. I'll give you an answer soon." Eric also made up his mind. If he couldn't find Steel Magnolias, then he would pick one from the movies with higher box office sales for Julia. In any case, with Julia's current fame, as long as her image was suitable and she had the intention to act in a movie, no production crew would reject her. He believed that many production companies wouldn't hesitate to raise their budget for this. Chapter 87. After sending Kapoor away, he welcomed Jeffrey. Then a few executives from Fox came over to greet him. When he was finally done, James Brooks ran over and said that a few producers wanted to meet him. "No problem, Let's continue. After greeting and sending off people for more than an hour, the smile on his face was a little stiff. Finally, it was quiet. He was so tired that he didn't want to pick up girls. He ran to a sofa in the corner and sat down. Mr. Williams, may I have the honor of dancing with you? Eric subconsciously showed a stiff smile. Before the girl could be happy, Eric shook his head. Sorry, miss, I'm too tired. Oh, sorry. She turned around and left in disappointment. He rejected another two bold female celebrities. Just when he thought that no one would disturb him again, a blond man with a beautiful face and a gentle voice approached him. Mr. Williams, my name is... Eric resisted the urge to put up a defensive posture. I don't want to know your name. I just want to be a normal handsome man. Is it so difficult? Sorry, can I be alone for a while? Oh, sorry. Can you not sound so bitter? Eric covered his forehead and complained in his heart. After a few seconds of silence, a voice sounded again. Eric, do you want juice? It can help with the hangover. Eric looked up and saw a gentle face with 2 glasses of orange juice in her hands. Of course, thank you, Miss Madsen. Eric took the juice. Virginia sat down next to Eric and leaned on Eric. She said with a bitter tone, I'm so happy that you still remember me. Can you call me Virginia? Okay, Virginia, Vicky, anything. The girl smiled and said, Oh right, how did Gerard get close to you? Are you? Eric subconsciously raised his voice and denied. Absolutely not. Oh, why are you overreacting? Don't worry, I don't discriminate against gays. I've seen many directors like this. I think gays are more sensitive. Vicky, can we change the subject? Virginia carefully observed Eric's expression and nodded. So you really aren't? Then what happened just now? Didn't you see? Virginia shook her head. I just went to the bathroom. When I came out, I saw Gerard leaving you. Eric explained. I was too tired, so I rejected a few girls' invitation to dance. Maybe this action made the boy misunderstand something. Hee, luckily I didn't invite you to dance. Otherwise, I would have been chased away by you. Eric didn't want to talk about this. It was indeed rude to refuse the invitations of several women. By the way, what movie have you been filming recently? When Virginia heard this question, she felt a strong sense of loss. Every time she thought of what Eric had said when she first met him, she thought that Eric had really inspired Pretty Woman based on her. Unfortunately, she didn't get the female lead role. Virginia had seen Julia Roberts shuttling through the crowd like a princess more than once. The little jealousy in her heart almost scratched her heart out. Julia wasn't as famous as her before, but now that lucky girl had become a world-famous Hollywood actress. If she had taken the initiative that night, perhaps she would be the one enjoying the compliments now. Thinking of this, Virginia made up her mind to hold on to Eric tightly tonight. I just finished filming a movie some time ago. I acted as the wife of a rich businessman. In the end, I drove into a river and died. I'm really sorry. Eric was embarrassed and didn't know how to answer. This doesn't seem to be my fault, right? It's not like I'm really dead. Why does it sound like I'm the murderer? After thinking about it, Eric persuaded. It will get better. It's hard to see hope. I'm almost past my prime. I can't act as a pure girl. In 2 years, I might only be able to act as a housewife. Hearing the words pure girl, Eric smiled. It seemed that Virginia still remembered what happened a few months ago. At that party, he had only casually mentioned it while dancing, but more importantly, he was complimenting the girl's beauty. He didn't care about the little thoughts in Virginia's words. Hollywood was also a world where men were superior to women. How could a woman who had neither power nor backing not play some tricks and do something wrong if she wanted to make a name for herself? Thinking back to his previous life, he didn't even manage to climb over that wall in 10 years. He could only wander around the periphery, watching it build tall buildings through the gaps, watching it host guests, watching it bustle with noise and excitement, watching it lead a drunken life. Vicky, do you want a chance? Virginia's eyes lit up. Of course I do. Eric looked the girl up and down unscrupulously. But I'm not an angel. What can you give me? Everything. The party had been going on for several hours, and many men and women were leaving in pairs. In any case, It was hard to fall in love at first sight at this kind of Hollywood party. Instead, there were jokes from time to time about people being cheated of money or sex. They took the elevator to the underground parking lot together. In this season, the temperature at night in Los Angeles was only about 10 degrees. As the cool night breeze blew, Virginia, who was wearing a thin dress, sobered up a little. She regretted agreeing to Eric so rashly. She felt that she should have at least whetted the young director's appetite and gotten a more reliable benefit first. What was this now? It was equivalent to not promising anything. If this young man turned his back on her later, she would have been played for nothing. A coat was gently placed on the girl. Virginia pulled the lapel and smiled at Eric. Forget it. Just take it as an onstage relationship. At least this young man is quite considerate. The two of them discussed in a low voice and decided to go to Virginia's place in Malibu. When Eric arrived, he had been surrounded by paparazzi. Those guys must now be very curious about whether Eric would bring a woman home tonight. The entrance of Beverly Hills mansion must have been staked out. Bringing Virginia back now was equivalent to providing the paparazzi with juicy material. It took nearly an hour to drive from the Hilton Hotel to Malibu, and there was no traffic. Fortunately, the two of them were talkative people, so there was no awkward silence along the way. They followed the girl into a small villa north of the coastal road. It was very far from the beach, and it was probably difficult to see the sea from the balcony on the second floor. Eric asked casually, "Why are you living here?" Virginia hung Eric's coat on the hanger and said frankly, "It's already good to be able to buy a small villa like this in Malibu. You don't think I can buy a house in Beverly Hills just because I've made a few movies, do you?" Eric shrugged, realizing that he had asked a stupid question like, "Why don't you eat minced meat?" Thinking back, after Virginia debuted with David Lynch's Dune, she really didn't have any outstanding works before the 1990s. Of course, after the 1990s, there weren't many works, and she later switched to acting in TV shows. Although this kind of actress had a certain level of fame, she didn't have box office appeal. Therefore, the films she could get were low-budget independent films, and the salary might only be tens of thousands of dollars. After tonight, another woman's fate would be changed by him. Anyway, after he appeared, Hollywood's history was destined to become a mess, so he could change it as he liked. What was the point of living again if he couldn't do whatever he wanted? Chapter 88. Eric walked to the sofa in the living room and sat down. The girl hung up her clothes and came to Eric. Their eyes met, and the atmosphere became tense. Eric couldn't help but hug the girl's waist and pull her in front of him. "Take off your high heels." Virginia obediently kicked off her high heels and said in a hoarse voice, "Eric, can I take a shower first?" The man didn't answer the girl's question. Virginia became shorter after taking off her high heels, but Eric was still not satisfied. He exerted a little force with his hands, and the girl's eyes flickered a few times before she obediently kneeled on the carpet. Feeling the satisfied expression of the man who had changed to looking down on her, Virginia put her small hand on Eric's thigh and raised her face. Her almond-shaped eyes were misty as she expressed her dissatisfaction. "Do all male animals like females submitting to their feet?" "Yes, but unfortunately, most of them don't have the ability to make women submit completely. What's with your hair? I remember it wasn't like this last time." Virginia touched her light blonde curls in confusion. She had deliberately imitated Marilyn Monroe's hairstyle. "Is there a problem? This color doesn't look good. Go and change it tomorrow." His commanding tone made the girl a little resistant. "But my hairstylist said that this color matches my eye color very well. I like golden brown." Virginia looked at Eric with an aggrieved expression. "All right." Eric took off the shoulder straps of the girl's gown. "Do you have an agency now?" Virginia shook her head. "I only have one agent." Eric interrupted the girl. "Your career hasn't improved after so many years. That person isn't qualified. Fire him and go to UTA to find Kapoor. I'll let him take care of you personally." "Kapoor Sid?" Virginia looked up excitedly. Of course she knew who Kapoor was. Kapil Sid only had 3 artists under him: Drew Barrymore, Al Pacino, who had made a comeback with Wind and Moon, and Julia Roberts, who had recently been called Hollywood's Cinderella by the media. Even in her wildest dreams, Virginia had never imagined that she would become the fourth. Until just a moment ago, she was still worried that Eric would go back on his word after tonight, or send her away with a nobody. Eric, thank you. Eric smiled and picked up the girl. Now where is the bedroom? Eric was woken up by the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Through the gaps in the curtains, the faint morning light shone in. He glanced at the girl curled up in his arms. She put on her clothes and walked to the balcony. Only then did she realize that the scenery here was not as bad as she had thought last night. She could overlook the sea not far away. The sun had just peeked out of the horizon, dyeing the distant sea with an exaggerated layer of orange. An unsightly sharp horn abruptly appeared in the southwest corner of his field of vision, domineeringly blocking the path of the white beach. Eric narrowed his eyes and looked carefully. Only then did he remember where it was. Last night, he was drunk on a beauty's lap. When he woke up in the morning, a man's ambition was always out of this world. With a thought, Eric returned to the girl's bedroom and found a stack of A4 paper on the table. It seemed to be a script. Eric was too lazy to look through it. A script that could be sent to Virginia was definitely not a good one. Coincidentally, there was a pen next to it. Eric picked up the things, carried a chair to the balcony, and put the stack of A4 paper on his knees, carefully looking at the terrain of the sharp horn area not far away, and then comparing it with the memory in his mind. Eric lowered his head and began to draw on the blank side of the paper. Using a pen was not as comfortable as using a pencil, but it was still passable. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The rustling sound lasted for more than half an hour. The girl in the bedroom woke up and found that the person next to her was gone. Virginia panicked for a moment, but she soon found the figure sitting on the balcony, engrossed in painting. The girl picked up her nightgown and put it on. She walked to the balcony and leaned over to hug the man's shoulder intimately. Good morning, Eric. Morning, Vicky. Do you still need this script? Virginia shook her head. Just draw. It's useless. I prepared for a long time, but I still didn't pass the audition. Eric nodded and continued drawing. Eric, what are you drawing? Eric pulled down a bird's eye view and handed it to the girl, pointing to the sharp horn area in the southwest. Virginia took it and looked at it, surprised. This is a design? Yes, the design of a mansion. I plan to buy that sharp horn area and build a house like this myself. Virginia returned the design to Eric with a smile and said, But that's a park. Eric took the design and said, It's not New York's Central Park. I'll definitely be able to get it if I think of a way. I plan to buy nearly a hectare of land there. I believe the Los Angeles County government will definitely be happy to increase their income. A hectare. Virginia did not notice that Eric was not using the imperial unit of measurement. She clumsily converted the area. A hectare was about 100,000 square feet, and her small villa was only 1,000 square feet. Gosh, a mansion that was 100 times bigger than Virginia's. It was beyond Virginia's imagination. If this man belonged to her. No, even if she could live in that dreamy mansion for a while, it would definitely be great. Eric, the geological situation there doesn't seem to be suitable for building a mansion. Otherwise, there would definitely be rich people trying to buy it. Virginia's voice was sweet, as if she had brought herself into a certain role. She began to give the man ideas. I think it's better to choose a piece of land with a private beach. Why do you have to choose that place? Eric once again drew an image in his mind on the white paper, and a mysterious smile appeared on his lips. Because that's Malibu 10880. After a pause he added, My Malibu 10880. Chapter 89. Virginia didn't understand what Eric was talking about at all. Puzzled, she asked, Malibu 10880? Eric nodded but didn't explain in detail. It was impossible for him to explain it clearly to the girl. In his previous life, Tony Stark's Malibu mansion with a sea view in Iron Man 3 had left a deep impression on Eric. After that, like many fans, he had looked up information about the mansion online, only to find that it was a CG model created by the movie company based on the original location in Malibu. Later, some people said that the mansion really did exist, but the address was in San Diego, California, and the owner had listed it for sale. The surrounding netizens quickly realized that it was just hype. The mansion in San Diego was indeed a nice seaside villa, but compared to the one in the movie, it was clearly the difference between a wild duck and a white swan. The even more flashy Stark Tower in New York wasn't likely to be realized. New York was now a carrot and a hole, but Iron Man's Malibu mansion was within Eric's ability. It was just a matter of money. For the current Eric, money wasn't a problem. Wind and Moon was expected to bring him hundreds of millions of dollars. With such a large sum of money, it was enough to build 100 villas in Malibu. He turned his head and glanced at the girl who was still lying on his shoulder. "Vicky, help me make breakfast. I'm so hungry." Virginia glanced at Eric. "Do you still need breakfast when I'm here? Go. Prepare some bread and fried eggs. Then lie on the table with an apple in your mouth. I'll eat you later." "As you wish, Your Highness." Virginia smiled and stretched out her head, wanting to kiss Eric on the lips. Just as her red lips approached, Eric suddenly thought of something and abruptly leaned to the side. No. With a bang, he fell to the ground with the chair. The stack of papers on his knees that had been secured by paper clips was torn apart and scattered all over the floor. Virginia hurriedly helped Eric up and patted the dust off him. "What's wrong with you? Why are you reacting so strongly?" Eric pointed at Virginia's mouth. "Have you brushed your teeth?" Virginia immediately understood. She rolled her eyes at Eric, got up, and left with a smile. The order of more than 10 pages of the manuscript was obviously messed up. Eric flipped through the pages, trying to mark the order, and inadvertently glanced at 2 eye-catching letters on a page. Steel Magnolias. Steel Magnolias. Eric quickly sorted out the order of the manuscript and started reading from the first page. Although it was only an audition clip and not a complete script, Eric was certain that this was the Steel Magnolias he was looking for. The scene in the script was obviously the timid hairstylist, Arnell. "My luck attribute points are really high. Maybe I should try my luck in Las Vegas," Eric muttered with a smile. Since this script appeared in Virginia's bedroom, the audition should have happened recently. Hopefully, the role hadn't been decided yet. He walked downstairs with the script. Virginia had changed into a set of home clothes and was wearing an apron as she busied herself in the kitchen. Noticing Eric behind her, Virginia turned around and smiled at him. "Eric, it'll be done soon." Eric raised the script in his hand and asked, "Vicky, when did you audition for this movie?" Virginia flipped the sizzling eggs in the frying pan with a spatula and quickly glanced at it. "Are you talking about Steel Magnolias? The audition was on Friday." "Yeah, it was the day before yesterday." "Can you tell me about this movie? How much do you know?" Virginia scooped out the fried eggs, turned off the fire and said, "Okay, Eric, let's talk in the dining room." Eric nodded and helped the girl bring breakfast into the dining room. Virginia poured Eric a glass of milk and said, "This script was recommended to me by my agent. The director is Herbert Ross. I heard that Samsung originally wanted to invest, but because they started the acquisition negotiations with Japanese Sony, they were worried that the movie would fail at the box office and cause the stock price to drop. Many of Columbia TriStar's movie projects that weren't optimistic were suspended. Herbert Ross had no choice but to invest and produce alone. The budget wasn't much, so I got the chance to audition." Because of Eric's promise last night, Virginia was no longer disappointed that she didn't get the role of Arnell. Her tone was very calm, as if she was talking about daily life. "Unfortunately, Herbert Ross felt that I was too old for the role, so I failed the audition." At the mention of her age, a trace of worry appeared in the girl's heart. She looked up at Eric. She was about to turn 30, and there was no way she could withstand a few more years. Eric's eating slowed down a lot. He was thinking quickly in his mind. Since Samsung had given up on this movie, maybe he could pull this project over. If Firefly wanted to grow, it couldn't just keep producing Eric's movies. It was necessary to invest in more projects, and Steel Magnolias might be a good attempt. Of course, Firefly would have to slowly build its own distribution channels. In his previous life, DreamWorks had to let the Big Six distribute their movies because they didn't have a complete distribution channel. As a result, most of the profits were taken by the Big Six. DreamWorks movies sold well, but they were losing money. In the end, they had to sell it to Viacom. In fact, DreamWorks also had their own distribution channels, but many of Spielberg's movies were made with big investments. With their own distribution channels, it would be good if they could get $100 million out of a movie that could earn $200 million at the box office worldwide. This was also the reason why Eric hadn't considered distributing his own movie yet. He was willing to give almost half of his profits to Fox because only a giant like Fox could fully release the box office potential of his movie. If he distributed his own movie, even if he got the same number of screens as Fox, he wouldn't be able to achieve the same box office. There were too many factors involved, and it was hard to explain them all. Gradually, Eric figured out the development plan of Firefly. While he gave his movies to the Big Six to make money, he also invested in some small-budget movies with a budget of a few million USD. He used these movies as cannon fodder to slowly accumulate resources and experience. When Firefly had developed to a certain extent, it would be logical to distribute his own movies. It seemed that the Weinstein brothers had taken the path of starting from a small budget. DreamWorks had been selling and selling, but the Weinstein brothers had been living a good life. Even after they lost Mira and Mike, the newly established Weinstein Pictures still had a place in Hollywood. Chapter 90. After putting down the phone, Eric turned to the girl and said, "Okay, let's go to UTA and find Kapoor. He knows what to do." Virginia had already changed into a rose-colored suit, which added a bit of intelligence. She carried a small bag in her hand and asked, "Aren't you coming back to the city with me?" "No, I'm waiting for my lawyer here. Also, it won't be good if the paparazzi find us together." Virginia took out a bunch of keys and handed them to Eric. "These are the spare keys to the villa. If you want, you can come over anytime." Eric smiled and took the keys and put them in his pocket. "Don't worry, I'll come often." Then he couldn't help but reach out and pinch the girl's chin. "You look so beautiful in this suit." Virginia winked at Eric and said, "It's only 8 o'clock. I can go out later." "Forget it, be careful or I won't let you go out for 3 days. Hurry up and go." "Oh, it's wrinkled." Virginia slapped Eric's hand away and tidied up her dress. "I'll go first." Not long after Virginia left, a black Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of the villa. Eric's private lawyer carefully checked the address on the note before pressing the doorbell in confusion. "Eric, did you buy another house here?" Edward asked when he saw Eric open the door. Eric explained, "No, this is a friend's house." Edward followed Eric into the living room. Without looking at the feminine home accessories, Edward was sure that this was a woman's house just by the faint fragrance in the air. This made him a little envious of Eric's luck with women. Eric led the private lawyer to the balcony on the second floor. He pointed at the sharp corner not far away and asked, "Edward, if I want to buy the land there, what do I need to do?" Edward put on his glasses and squinted. He shook his head and said, "Eric, it's too far. Why don't we go take a look? It's hard to explain here." "No problem." Eric picked up the script and followed Edward out. The two of them stood at the edge of the cliff in the sharp corner area. Beneath their feet were bare brown rocks, surrounded by weeds, but the blue sea in front of them was beautiful. Edward held a design draft in his hand. Although it was drawn with a fountain pen, Eric's solid sketching skills made the building look vivid and lifelike. The private lawyer sighed inwardly at the grandeur and luxury of the building in the draft. If it was really completed, it would definitely become a landmark in Malibu. "Eric, are you sure you want to build such a mansion?" "Can't I?" Edward nodded. "Both sides are private villas. Although I don't know much about construction, I can guess that the reason why this place was turned into a park is because it's not suitable for construction. Otherwise, no one would leave this dozen acres of land empty. As long as we can get this land," Eric said. "No matter how much it costs, I'll build it. If the ground doesn't work, we'll reinforce it with cement. If we need soil, We'll transport it from outside. If the excavator can't work, we'll use explosives. Edward smiled and shook his head. Eric also felt that his words were too nouveau riche. He smiled and said, "Edward, you're not cursing damn rich people in your heart, are you?" "Of course not. I just feel that there's no need to do this, Eric. Look at those." Edward pointed at the villas twice. "Those villas are very comfortable to live in. But here, there's nothing but rocks and weeds." After Edward finished speaking, he looked at Eric with a curious expression. He wanted to know why Eric suddenly wanted to build a mansion here. "This is one of my dreams." Eric understood what the private lawyer wanted to ask and made up an excuse. "When I was young, I just moved from England to Los Angeles. My father brought me here to play once. With the mentality of a teenager, I suddenly had the idea of building a big house on this piece of land. Later, I gradually forgot about it. Until this morning, when I suddenly saw this place again. I remembered my whimsical dream from a long time ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now that I have enough financial power, why not make it happen?" After that, Eric picked up a blade of grass and chewed twice. "Since I was young, I have countless ideas. Along the way, I have to make a few of them come true so that I won't have any regrets in the future. Edward, have you had any unusual ideas in the past?" Edward seemed to be reminded by Eric's words. "When I was in high school, I wanted to be a rock star, so I skipped class to go to school. My father caught me and locked me up for a month. My father once joined the Marine Corps and went to the battlefield, so he was locked up in standard military-style confinement. You'll never know how terrible it was if you haven't experienced it. After a month, I was released and obediently applied to Yale Law School." Eric laughed and looked at Edward, who was more like a scholar. "You don't look like someone who once played rock and roll." Edward sighed. "Of course, it's been almost 30 years. At that time, the Beatles had just been established, and Elvis was still at his peak. Now these legends have faded." Elvis and the Beatles were too far away for Eric, but he could still hear the reminiscence and emotion in Edward's voice. He reached out and touched a few pockets. Edward glanced at Eric's movements and also dug into his pocket. He took out a pack of cigarettes. "Are you looking for this?" Eric took a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff. "I thought you didn't smoke." Edward looked around instinctively before lighting one. "I smoke once in a while. I was a heavy smoker in high school. When my father found out, he would beat me up with a rattan. It was very painful, and it slowly formed a psychological shadow. Even after my father stopped caring, I still have the habit of smoking secretly. Many people think I don't have this habit." The two men, who were both in their 40s mentally, smoked and chatted. After half an hour of the sea breeze, Edward crushed the last cigarette and stuffed it into the empty cigarette box with Eric's. "I haven't been so relaxed in a long time. Then you can come here often in the future." "I'm too busy." Edward shook his head and said, "Eric, get the check ready. I'll try my best to help you get this land." "Thank you." "You're welcome. I want a commission." Edward joked. "However, Eric, you need to find a financial manager. What happened today, strictly speaking, is beyond the scope of my service." Chapter 91. Eric originally planned to find a manager, but it wasn't an easy task. Although he hadn't received a share of any movie, no one could deny that he was now worth more than $100 million. Only Eric knew that the copyright to Jurassic Park, in his hands, Pixar Studio, and the gold mines that he planned to continue to take over in the future would easily make his assets exceed $10 billion in the future. In this case, he couldn't let an outsider manage his assets. Professional ethics were something that people would only stick to if they weren't attracted enough. It wasn't uncommon for Hollywood stars to be deceived by their own financial managers. In Lujo's previous life, Nicolas Cage's bankruptcy had a lot to do with Cage's squandering personality, but without his financial manager's help, this kind of thing wouldn't have happened so easily. The more chaotic the employer's financial situation was, the easier it was to take advantage of the situation. If the accounts were clear and organized, the value of the assets would belong to the employer, and the financial manager could only receive his own share of the compensation. After getting a ride back to Los Angeles, Eric went to the Hilton Hotel parking lot to pick up his car and drove directly to the Firefly headquarters. Jeffrey had already acquired the rights to Woman's Scent when Eric left Los Angeles. Eric hadn't had time to write the script for Woman's Scent yet. Jeffrey also raised another issue, which was the financial situation of Firefly. The filming of Wind and Moon had already used up all the money Eric invested in the company, and he still had to wait until the movie ended before he could receive a share of the profits. Although he had a good relationship with Fox, Eric was sure that if he talked to Barry Diller about this, he would definitely talk business with him. On the other hand, Eric had taken out a US $50 million loan using the Home Alone contract as collateral. He had spent US $20 million to buy Pixar, and left US $10 million as the initial funds for Toy Story. Now he only had US $20 million left. This amount of money wasn't even enough for his next movie, let alone Eric's plans for several other movies. Eric signed a $20 million check and handed it to the company's finance manager. Then he said to Jeffrey, "Let's do it this way. Let's prepare 4 Smelling Women first. I'll rush out the script in a few days." "What about your movie?" Eric shrugged. "We can only continue with the loan." In any case, he had already borrowed it once. Even if he resisted at first, he would get used to it after a while. Anyway, he wouldn't let other film companies interfere with his movie project for the time being. "By the way, Jeffrey, this is a script that I came across by chance. The director is Herbert Ross, and it's still in the casting stage. I heard that the budget for this movie is not very generous. You can contact him and see if he can get this project. Firefly is willing to co-invest. At the same time, you can also convince Julia Roberts to join this movie." Jeffrey looked at the script that Eric handed over. He read a few paragraphs and didn't see anything special, but he didn't raise any objections. By now, he no longer doubted Eric's vision for movies. As Eric said, he was more suited to the role of producer. The content of the movie was left to Eric to decide. "No problem, I'll contact Herbert Ross as soon as possible." In the morning, Eric finished dealing with things that he needed to personally handle. When he was about to go home, Jeffrey knocked on the door and walked into his office. "Eric, do you still remember Amy Pascal? Of course, if it wasn't for her, Home Alone wouldn't have been released so smoothly. Speaking of which, I haven't been able to thank her in person." "She called," Jeffrey said and pulled Eric up. "She didn't hang up. She's looking for you." Eric quickly got up and followed Jeffrey to his office. "Amy? Long time no see. I always wanted to say thank you. Unfortunately, you suddenly resigned last time." "Of course, no problem. Then see you later." After hanging up the phone, Eric and Jeffrey looked at each other. Jeffrey was the first to say what he knew. "Amy returned to Columbia and is temporarily the vice president. Blunt Cohen has left. I heard he retired early and went to France." "She just told you?" Jeffrey nodded. "I chatted with her for a bit." "Why is Amy looking for you?" "She said she wants to invite me to dinner." The two chatted for a bit, but didn't have any clues. Eric looked at his watch and said, "Then I'll go first. Jeffrey, I'll leave Smelling Women and Steel Magnolias to you. I'll be at home working on the script for the next few days. I won't come to the company. Call me if you need anything." "No problem," Jeffrey responded, and the two walked out of the office side by side. When Eric arrived at the agreed restaurant, he found that Amy Pascal was already waiting there. The woman was wearing a black business suit, and her shoulder-length blonde hair was permed into wavy curls. It was said that this strong woman's hairstyle would show her mood. Eric didn't know what this hairstyle meant. The two hugged gently and Eric said, "Sorry, Amy. There was a traffic jam on the road. I can't believe I made you wait for me here." "It's okay," Amy Pascal smiled and said. "You're not late. In fact, I came too early." The two sat down at the table together. Amy Pascal handed the menu to Eric. "What do you want to eat?" Eric took it and suddenly smiled. "It feels strange. The order of the two of us is completely reversed. I should have said that sentence." "Forget it, big boy. This meal is on me. Don't be so manly." Eric shrugged and didn't refute. Amy Pascal didn't have much contact with him, so she didn't know the mature side of his personality. Therefore, it was understandable for her to speak to him in the tone she used to speak to a young man of his age. After randomly ordering lunch, Eric handed the menu to Amy. The woman didn't look at the menu. She skillfully stated her requirements and handed the menu to the waiter. "Do you come here often to eat?" "Yet the food here is good." Amy wasn't in a hurry to explain why she invited Eric. Eric wasn't in a hurry either. It wasn't until the two of them had lunch together and casually chatted about topics such as the weather and current events. After lunch and coffee, Amy finally told him her purpose. Chapter 92. After listening to Amy Pascal's description of Coca-Cola's CEO, Guasida's offer, it was impossible for Eric not to be tempted. He even felt that there was a huge trap waiting for him. Otherwise, how could such a good deal fall from the sky? Provide enough budget funds and not interfere with the production of the movie at all. They could even provide a team to help him make another movie to deal with Fox's contract. After that, he could still get 30% of the local box office and 10% of the overseas box office. This kind of condition was a little crazy. Even Spielberg couldn't get such good treatment. "Amy, Columbia's offer gives me a sense of unreality. I didn't have a good cooperation with Columbia last time, so I find it hard to believe that there is something fishy going on?" Amy said seriously. "Eric, believe me, in order to facilitate this cooperation and prevent anyone from interfering, the board of directors specifically removed the former president, Mr. Blunt Cohen. This is enough to express Columbia's sincerity." Eric still shook his head. Although he was happy that Blunt Cohen left, it was not enough for him to believe that Columbia did this because of him. "I need a real reason that can convince me?" Amy pondered and explained in detail. "Because Columbia is in acquisition negotiations with Japanese Sony. They need a hot movie to stimulate the stock price, and you are the safest one at the moment. The 3 movies that you've participated in have all achieved amazing box office results. With the continuous accumulation of this kind of box office appeal, the audience has formed a certain habit of watching movies. When your next movie is released, many people will habitually walk into the cinema to watch it. As long as your next movie maintains the previous standard and doesn't go astray, it is reasonable to get a box office hit of over 100 million yuan again." Seeing Eric's gradually understanding expression, Amy continued, "So, don't think that Columbia is doing a losing business. This is a win-win cooperation. Eric, the hot sales of Home Alone pushed Columbia's stock price from $12 to $14. The market value rushed from $2 billion to $56 billion. Eric did some calculations. In other words, Columbia's market value had increased by 360 million because of the success of Home Alone. Under normal circumstances, although this kind of growth was exciting, the shareholders would not sell their shares just because the stock price had increased by $2. After all, they were interested in long-term benefits, and their main income was the annual profits and dividends. At the same time, once the movie investment failed, the stock price would fall again. But after Sony decided to acquire Columbia, the situation changed. Every increase in the share prices will be converted into cash. The Colombian shareholders would not calculate their net worth with the Japanese. If they wanted to buy the company, they had to use the share price as a standard and pay a certain premium. In Fengyu's previous life, Sony had spent almost $5 billion to acquire Columbia. This was because Columbia's assets were less than $2 billion. A year after the acquisition, Columbia's share prices fell back to normal. The market value of Columbia had dropped by 2.7 billion renminbi. Sony's board of directors wanted to cry. No matter if it was in his previous life or this life, Eric didn't have a good impression of Japanese people. How could he not be included in this kind of action of slaughtering a fat sheep? Of course, Fengyu still pretended that he was in a difficult position. His own interests were the most important. "Amy, if this is the case, I am happy to work with Columbia again. But I had signed a contract with Fox for 3 movies. As for what you said about Columbia providing me with a team to produce a movie to deal with Fox, I definitely won't agree. This concerns my personal reputation. And many people have questioned whether I can produce the first few movies at my age. Amy asked after Eric agreed. Eric, do you have a plan in mind? Eric smiled. I guess you've already gotten the details of the contract. That's why you're offering the same price. Although the local share is 5% less than Fox's, it's still a reasonable price for the price Columbia is paying. Amy blushed. Although the terms of the contract between Eric and Fox were not confidential, they were not disclosed to the public. There must be some spies involved. Eric wasn't interested in gossiping. He continued, since Columbia already knows about the content of the contract, you should know that Fox's contract is mainly for the distribution rights of the sequel to Home Alone. There are a lot of detailed clauses for that movie, but they are not interested in the other two movies, so... Amy Pascal interrupted excitedly. So even if you do not let Fox distribute your next movie, you only need to give Fox 3 movies before the end of the year, right? Eric nodded, then shook his head. Although this does not violate the contract, Fox is not that easy to get rid of. Fox has already scheduled my next movie for the summer, and because Fox does not have many movie releases this year, Fox will directly withdraw from the summer box office competition if I withdraw. This will cause Fox to lose tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. Amy Pascal frowned in distress. Although the 6 giants competed and cooperated, Columbia could not come up with enough chips to make Fox give up such a large amount of profits. She glanced at the boy opposite her. Eric shrugged helplessly. He could not think of any solution for the time being. Moreover, the summer movies this year were saturated, especially in terms of big-budget movies. Although Eric could give it his all and direct another movie for Fox, it wasn't a problem for someone like him who had a cheat code. However, if that was the case, would this extra film be up against Batman in May, or against Raiders of the Lost Ark in June? Was he going to have to compete with himself in July? This was bound to result in a lose-lose situation. But at the same time, he was not willing to give up the generous offer from Columbia. Even if the North American box office of his next movie was $200 million, his share would only be $10 million less than Fox, and Columbia was willing to pay $30 million for the production cost. Not to mention, he was not that confident in his next movie. As long as he could invite Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks, plus his own box office appeal, it would definitely exceed $100 million. However, he did not have the box office of his previous life as a reference because his next movie was not a Hollywood movie from his previous life. Give me a few days, I need to communicate with Mr. Barry Diller. It would be best if I can get Fox's understanding. If we can't reach an agreement, I won't violate the agreement anyway. Do you need Columbia to do anything? Amy Pascal asked. Eric did not comment. What can Columbia do? You can't go to Mr. Barry Diller's office and say, hey, we need some bargaining chips to negotiate with the Japanese. How about giving us Williams' next movie? Amy smiled and shook her head. Okay, I'll wait for your good news. If you need help, you can contact me directly. The two exchanged their contact information and said goodbye. After Eric returned home, he directly called Barry Diller's office, but was told by the other party's assistant that Barry Diller went to Europe on a business trip and would be back in 4 days. Although the assistant gave Barry Diller's temporary contact information to Eric, he did not call him directly. Instead, he made an appointment for a meeting in 4 days. After all, it was difficult to talk clearly over the phone. The two were thousands of miles apart. If the communication did not go well, it would not be worth it. Chapter 93. It's only been 4 days, and you've already finished the script. Jeffrey asked Eric in surprise as he picked up, Knowing Women by Smelling Fragrance, on the top of the stack. It's only the first draft. During the filming, I will definitely make a lot of changes according to the specific situation. Eric replied as he took a few steps back and sat comfortably on the sofa. He asked, I previously faxed you the outline of the script and asked you to send invitations to Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. Did you receive any responses? Jeffrey flipped through the work record and replied, yes. I sent an invitation to Tom Hanks for the role of Sean. However, Hanks hopes to play the role of Andy. He feels that the character is both good and evil, and it's very malleable. There's more room for acting. As for Tom Cruise, he also expressed a strong interest in the script. However, he hopes to change the scene of Andy cross-dressing. He doesn't want his image in the eyes of his fans to be damaged. The next movie that Eric was preparing to shoot was the pinnacle of his previous life's Milky Way movie, Dark War. When writing the script, Eric directly used the English names of Andy and Ching Yun for the two male leads. If he had to choose two actors to replace Andy and Ching Yun in Hollywood, was there anyone more suitable than Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks? One of them was an idol, while the other was an actor. It was very similar to the pair in his previous life. Of course, the current Hanks was still somewhat handsome. However, he was only a little bit handsome, and he would soon be crippled. If Hanks were to replace Andy's role, with his current image, would he be able to make the bus girl fall in love with him at first sight? Did he have to be so ignorant? Jeffrey, they probably don't know that the other party has received an invitation. Tell them the news, and see if they can arrange a time to talk. Okay, I'll contact them in a moment. Jeffrey replied. Also, Herbert Ross agreed to invest in Steel Magnolias with Firefly, but Capel insisted that Julia's salary was $5 million. If that's the case, the production cost of the movie would be at least $13 million. Previously, Herbert Ross only managed to pull in $4 million in investment, and Firefly needs an additional $9 million. Shouldn't you talk to Kapoor and see if you can lower Julia's salary a little? After all, this is a group movie, and Julia doesn't have many scenes. I think it'll be $3 million at most. If it's any higher, it won't be worth it. I'll give Kapoor a call. Eric nodded. By the way, make a copy of the script for Identifying Women by Smelling Fragrance, and give it to Air. Get him to start preparing. Also, for the script at the bottom, send a brief outline to Wes Craven, William Friedkin, and Jonathan Demme. See if they're interested in directing it. After Jeffrey wrote it down, he flipped to the last script and glanced at it. The uninvited guest? Eric nodded. This movie might be better known by another translation, Island Horror. But Eric felt that it would be more appropriate to translate it as The Uninvited Guest. The original English title of the movie was The Others. As for the three directors he was interested in, Wes Craven was the famous director of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and then the Scream series. William Friedkin directed The Exorcist in 1973. This horror film was once known as the #1 horror film in Hollywood. Of course, this title was on the verge of collapse after the rise of Japanese horror films in Hollywood. Finally, Jonathan Demme was still just a small director on the streets. But in the parallel timeline, he would release The Silence of the Lambs 2 years later and become an instant hit. The reason why Jonathan Demme, who was still unknown, was added after the two famous masters, was for Virginia's sake. Eric didn't doubt that a horror movie with a big twist like Island Horror wouldn't be recognized by the two horror masters who had been famous for many years, but he wasn't sure if they would accept Virginia as the female lead. Eric didn't intend to give in on this point. And Jonathan Demme couldn't bargain with Eric in this regard. Do we send the invitations separately or one by one? Jeffrey asked again. Send them at the same time. Remember to make it clear that the female lead has been decided. There's no room for negotiation. Jeffrey revealed a strange smile. Eric, which girl do you like this time? Virginia Madsen. Jeffrey remembered the actress who left with Eric at the celebration party for Wind and Moon. Eric, I have to remind you. Jeffrey rarely used the posture of an elder to advise his junior. Investing in a movie is a matter that requires extreme caution. You can't promise a female lead just because of one ONS. It's not worth it. Even if you leave a huge check for the other party, you can't make promises easily. Because if the female lead causes the movie to fail, you will have to bear a loss of millions or even tens of millions of dollars. With such a large sum of money, even the most high-class Ingzha girls will be enough to find thousands of them. Eric never vented his anger, or ignored those who advised him with good intentions. He patiently listened to Jeffrey's advice and explained, Don't worry, Jeffrey, I know my limits. I've already asked Kapoor to sign Virginia up. If she didn't have the potential, I wouldn't have done it. Didn't you and Kapoor not think highly of Julia back then? How about now? It's good that you know what you're doing. Then, I'll leave things here to you, Jeffrey. Eric stood up and said, I told you about AIME's matter on the phone before. I just happened to have an appointment with Mr. Barry Diller today. You seem to be used to the phrase, I'll leave things to you. I'm considering whether to apply for a raise, Jeffrey said jokingly. In fact, he enjoyed his busy and fulfilling life. Compared to the decadent first time they met, Jeffrey now looked much younger. His whole face was glowing and full of vitality. Eric knew that Jeffrey was joking. He was now the president of Firefly, and was responsible for the dividends from Eric's movie production. Although he didn't have shares of Firefly yet, his income was definitely at the top of the pyramid in Hollywood. If you insist, I'll add $1. After joking for a while, Jeffrey got up and sent Eric out the door. He said, Don't fall out with Fox, try to be tactful. Eric shrugged and said, It involves tens of millions of dollars of profit. It's useless to be tactful. Fox didn't pay attention to the specific details of the contract, so I didn't breach the contract. Anyway, I won't let go of this opportunity from Columbia. I think even if Barry Diller was in my position, he would definitely make the same choice as me. Chapter 94. Along the way, Eric was racking his brains on how to explain this to Barry Diller. At the celebration party for Wind and Moon, the two had already discussed the issue of the next movie. It was almost a tacit agreement that the next movie would be released by Fox during the summer. Now that he suddenly changed his mind, it was hard to predict how Fox would react. If possible, Eric didn't want to be on bad terms with any movie mogul. He wasn't strong enough now, and it was hard to say if he would be suppressed. What's more, Fox still held the distribution rights of his 3 movies, which involved hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. Because he was in a dilemma from time to time, Eric accidentally ran a red light. Fortunately, nothing happened. Finally, they arrived at Fox headquarters. After Eric reported his identity, he went all the way to Barry Diller's office without any obstruction. Mr. Williams, please wait for a few minutes. The president is meeting with a guest. Barry Diller's secretary led Eric into the outer lounge, and carefully served a cup of coffee for Eric. Eric glanced curiously at the door of Barry Diller's office. The office was soundproof, and he couldn't hear a single sound from here. The young and beautiful secretary noticed Eric's curious look. She hesitated and whispered, Fox TV station manager. Eric raised his eyebrows and had to cast a grateful look at the girl who pretended as if nothing had happened and didn't say anything. This girl was really smart. With a simple sentence, she didn't reveal anything, but she did Eric a small favor. Also, when the girl leaned over, Eric didn't know if it was intentional or not, but her work ID just happened to appear in front of him. He couldn't forget her name even if he wanted to. After patiently waiting for 7 or 8 minutes, a middle-aged man opened the door and walked out of the office dejectedly. When he caught a glimpse of Eric sitting on the sofa in the lounge and looking at him through the glass, the middle-aged man quickly put away his dejected expression and politely nodded at Eric before leaving in a hurry. Mr. Williams, you may go in now. Eric walked into the office. A faint smell of cigarette smoke wafted in the air. There were several cigarette butts piled up in the ashtray in front of Barry Diller. Eric, sorry to keep you waiting. After Eric entered the door, Barry Diller had already put away his emotions, but Eric still saw the residual anger on his face. Just a few minutes, Eric said as he walked to the opposite sofa and sat down under Barry Diller's signal. Barry Diller didn't explain anything, but when he thought about the identity of the middle-aged man who had just left, Eric could guess the reason for his anger. It was nothing more than the unsatisfactory performance of Fox TV. The 3 major television stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS, had dominated the North American TVB market for so many years. It was impossible for them to let a latecomer easily become a threat to their position. From this point of view, Barry Diller was indeed a media genius. In his previous life, under the pressure of the 3 major television stations, He developed Fox TV to become the fourth largest television station in North America. After chatting for a while, Barry Diller asked Eric why he was here. Eric didn't think of any euphemism along the way. He could only get straight to the point. "Mr. Diller, I'm afraid my next movie can't be released by Fox." Barry Diller was sure he didn't hear wrong. He immediately frowned and narrowed his eyes. He had just heard some bad news from the manager of Fox TV. He didn't expect to receive another piece of bad news before his mood had completely changed. "Eric, do you want to breach the contract? Have you thought about the consequences of doing so?" Since the matter had already been laid out, Eric no longer hesitated. He looked straight into Barry Diller's eyes and said, "Mr. Diller, I don't intend to breach the contract. The contract doesn't prohibit me from cooperating with other film companies. At the same time, there's no specific schedule for the 3 movies. So I just need to deliver the 3 movies to Fox before the end of the year." Barry Diller was slightly stunned. A faint sense of regret emerged. He was personally responsible for signing the contract. It was indeed Fox's negligence that they didn't prohibit Eric from cooperating with other film companies. This was because most of the staff members who drafted the contract were focused on the details of Home Alone. And Eric signed the contract for 3 movies. There were very few directors in Hollywood who could direct 3 movies a year. If most directors could maintain the speed of 1 movie a year, they would be considered highly productive. Who would have thought that this young man had so much energy? But the lack of a schedule for the movies was intentional by Barry Diller. When drafting the contract, Fox wasn't very optimistic about the other 2 movies that Eric requested to be bundled together. Therefore, although Eric specifically mentioned the issue of the schedule, hoping to put the 3 movies in the popular holiday schedule, and even had a small dispute with Barry Diller over this, Fox ultimately rejected it for various reasons. Fox also had its own ideas. Once Eric's first 2 movies weren't optimistic, Fox could also calmly put the 2 movies in the unpopular spring or fall schedule. This way, it wouldn't take up too much of Fox's resources, and could smoothly fulfill the contract. Who would have thought that Eric's next movie, Wind and Moon, would be a great success again? Now no one could judge this young man based on luck. Many movie fans also began to look forward to his next movie. Now the atmosphere in the office was a little stagnant. When Eric said those words, Barry Diller realized that he had proudly rejected Eric's schedule request. Now it had become a big cocoon that wrapped him up. "Eric, are you still not satisfied with a 35% cut? Wind and Moon only cost $7 million USD. If you subtract Lamborghini's $1 million USD advertising sponsorship, the movie's actual cost is only $6 million USD. And Fox has paid more than $15 million USD in publicity fees so far. That's 2.5 times the cost of your movie. 2.5 times. But we only get 20%. What are you still not satisfied with this kind of profit split?" Barry Diller's tone was almost roaring at the end, and his whole body exuded an oppressive aura. He had just returned from Europe last night. After a few days of running around, he didn't even get a good night's sleep. Early in the morning, he heard that Fox's new drama was jointly strangled by the 3 major TV stations, and that the ratings were disastrous. He had just reprimanded the Fox TV station manager, and chased him out of the office when he received another piece of bad news. The anger that had just been suppressed erupted again. Eric wasn't frightened by Barry Diller's aura and calmly retorted, "Mr. Diller, although Fox paid $15 million USD, it can be exchanged for more than $80 million USD in profit, so I don't owe you anything. To be honest, when I came, I was very nervous. I didn't want to be in a deadlock with Fox. I just wanted to have a good talk." Seeing that the young man opposite him wasn't frightened by him, nor did he yell at him like a teenager, but instead calmly refuted his words, Barry Diller quickly calmed down and realized that his ability to control his emotions was worse than a young man under the age of 20. After reflecting on himself, Barry Diller sat back in his office chair and took a few deep breaths. He still stared at Eric and said, "Well, Eric, what new conditions do you have? Can you tell me first?" Eric realized that Barry Diller didn't fully understand his meaning and explained, "Mr. Diller, I don't intend to amend the contract. What I said just now wasn't because I wanted to get more benefits from Fox. Someone has made an offer that I can't refuse and wants to get the distribution rights of my next movie. Barry Diller had been in Hollywood for so many years. After calming down, he quickly thought of a possibility and asked, "Columbia?" Eric nodded. Barry Diller lowered his head in silence, took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff. Since Columbia had persuaded Eric, it meant that the other party's conditions were impossible for Fox to meet. All of Columbia's actions were now aimed at driving up the stock price and obtaining more benefits from the Japanese. At this time, in order to get Eric's new movie, it was not surprising that the other party would offer crazy conditions. Chapter 95. After taking a few puffs, Barry Diller put out the cigarette in the ashtray irritably. "It seems that you can't change your decision?" "Mr. Diller, I could have even stopped communicating with Fox completely. I could have just taken out a movie to complete the contract. If I didn't care about the quality, I could have made a movie in 10 days. Barry Diller knew that the young man in front of him had made up his mind and would not change his decision. Although in his heart, he also had the thought of teaching this arrogant little fellow a lesson. However, Barry Diller quickly rejected this idea. Once he did that, the two sides would break up like how Eric and Columbia had broken up after their cooperation. He also heard the news that Columbia President Blunt Cohen was suddenly removed from his position a few days ago. He had some doubts. Coca-Cola was about to sell Columbia, so why did he do this? Now he understood that it was to remove obstacles to re-establish cooperation with the young man in front of him. If he made some moves now and made things difficult with the other party, the young man would probably break up with Fox after completing the contract. Then it would be a lose-lose situation. When things were irreparable, Barry Diller quickly thought of trying to get some additional benefits to make up for the loss. "Eric, you should understand that what you're doing is equivalent to letting Fox withdraw from the summer box office competition. Although your approach does not violate the contract, it will still hurt the relationship between the two sides. In order to appease Fox's shareholders, perhaps the original contract should be amended?" After Eric listened to Barry Diller's words, he immediately refused. "Mr. Diller, the contract will definitely not be amended. I will not make any concessions on the share. I just said that I don't owe Fox anything. The reason why I'm sitting here to discuss with you is that I don't want the relationship between the two sides to be strained. We can only discuss a win-win compensation plan without harming the interests of either side. This way, the cooperation between us can last longer." "Well, I'm sure you have a plan?" Eric nodded and said, "Yes, my company Firefly has recently made plans for 3 more movies. Fox can choose one of them to release." Barry Diller almost wanted to laugh out loud. What kind of compensation was this? If Fox wanted to release a movie, all they had to do was say the word, and those independent film companies would come crying and shouting. Barry Diller suddenly thought of the Fox TV station manager that he had just chased out, and another idea popped into his head. "Eric, are you interested in TV series?" When Eric heard the word TV series, the image of the girl who stubbornly stayed in New York to film a failed workplace comedy appeared in his mind. Over the past 10 years, Friends had earned Warner a whopping $4 billion in profits. Eric had never intended to let go of this TV series. Although he had not watched all 10 seasons, he had coincidentally watched the first 2 seasons. With the help of the golden finger brought by his rebirth, it was clearly imprinted in his mind. As long as the first season was successful, there was no need to worry about finding a screenwriter to continue the story. "Mr. Diller, in fact, I already have some ideas for TV series. But maybe I didn't make it clear just now. Of the 3 movies produced by Firefly, although I didn't direct them, I wrote the scripts myself for 2 of them. I will also be the producer and have the final editing rights of the movies. This is not much different from the movies that I made myself. And for the other movie, I plan to let Julia play the female lead. With Julia's current box office appeal, I'm sure no one will doubt it, right?" After listening to Eric's words, Barry Diller said without hesitation, "No problem, Eric. Fox will take care of the other 3 movies of Firefly. In addition, the TV series can also be produced at the same time. You just need to be responsible for writing the script." Although Barry Diller seemed to be very generous, Eric could still see the slight excitement in his tone. Obviously, Barry Diller had also judged the value of the 3 movies. Eric had never intended to release the 3 movies himself. These were the movies that he had specifically picked out with the potential to be a big hit. He didn't use the cannon fodder to expand his distribution channels. But at the same time, he didn't intend to give all 3 movies to one movie company to distribute, let alone give them all to Fox. He knew the principle of giving grace to those who give it to you, and enmity to those who don't. If you give too much to one person, the other person will gradually take it for granted. Once one day, you don't want to give it anymore, hatred will directly arise. In fact, Barry Diller had already shown signs of this just now. Eric's behavior didn't violate the contract, but Barry Diller felt that Fox had suffered a big loss. Shaking his head, Eric raised a finger. Mr. Diller, a TV series or a movie can only compensate for one. I'm very confident in the box office potential of those 3 movies. It's no less than the movies I directed. So if Fox takes too much, I'm worried that your distribution ability won't be able to keep up. Barry Diller quickly came up with another plan. Eric, then a TV series and a movie will do. A TV series or a movie? Eric? The two argued in the office for a long time. In the end, Barry Diller chose the TV series because of his ambition for the TV network. If it wasn't for the development of the TV network, Barry Diller wouldn't have left Paramount, so Eric wasn't surprised by this choice. However, the other party didn't let Eric off easily and forced him to agree to personally direct the first 2 episodes of the TV series. Eric didn't expect Barry Diller to come up with such a forward-looking idea. More than 10 years later, inviting well-known Hollywood directors to direct the first few episodes had become a popular trend in American TV series. With the rise of American TV series, Hollywood directors also put down their airs and picked up the guiding tube for TV series. In fact, Barry Diller wasn't as far-sighted as Eric thought. Even Barry Diller himself thought it was a ridiculous idea to let a well-known Hollywood director direct a TV series. In this era, it was a very degrading thing for a movie director to direct a TV series. It had always been TV series directors who slowly changed their careers to film. It was rare to see the opposite. The reason why he proposed the condition of letting Eric direct the first 2 episodes was that he didn't have the distribution rights for the movie. He wanted to make a fool of Eric. Barry Diller thought that Eric would definitely refuse, but he didn't expect the other party to nod and agree after a moment of consideration. According to the current trend of Hollywood directors, if the news of Eric directing a TV series spread, he would definitely be criticized by some bigots who were full of superiority. Barry Diller didn't expect that his unintentional and rude request would cause such a big sensation. It even led to the trend of directing the first few episodes of American TV series by famous directors in advance. After reaching an understanding with Fox, Eric let go of his worries and reached an agreement with Columbia. Since the other party was so generous, Eric directly raised the production budget to $40 million. If the publicity cost was $20 million in the future, according to Columbia's 25% share, the North American box office would have to reach $240 million before Columbia could recover the cost. Of course, if the box office earnings outside of Shanghai were included, the figure might only need to reach $200 million. Eric reckoned that Columbia did not intend to recoup its costs at all. As long as the box office sales were good, it would give investors the illusion of a bright future. The stock price would go up directly. For every dollar the stock price rose, Columbia's market value would increase by $180 million. Sony, you are filthy rich. Just fork out the money. Under these circumstances, Eric was stingy and did not leave the copyright to Columbia. Instead, he shared it with Firefly. After all, Firefly had forked out so much money, and it would be cruel if he did not give them a share. Although the male lead of this movie died in the ending, if the movie was a success, Sony could change the male lead to film the sequel like in Feng Yu's previous life. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.